Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step through the gates of Buckingham Palace in the year 1851, leaving behind a London of rattling carriage wheels, smoky chimneys, damp pavements, and streets that smell rather enthusiastically of horses. Ahead of you rises the royal residence of Queen Victoria, impressive and guarded, though not quite the postcard palace you might recognise today. And before you start imagining yourself comfortably settling into a royal bedroom, remember that unless you arrive with the correct title, invitation, uniform, or employment, you probably won't survive 5 minutes of palace etiquette without embarrassing yourself in front of someone important. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there. Perhaps it is midnight in Toronto, early morning in Sydney, or a rainy evening somewhere in Yorkshire. Now, dim the lights, and imagine that the pavement beneath your feet is no longer modern. It is 1851. You stand near Buckingham Palace on a cool London morning, with a thin grey haze hanging over the city. Coal smoke drifts between rooftops and settles into your clothes with the persistence of a guest who has forgotten when to leave. Somewhere behind you, iron-rimmed wheels scrape over the road. A horse snorts, harness buckles jingle softly. London is enormous, restless, and increasingly confident. This is the year of the Great Exhibition. Prince Albert's grand international showcase housed inside the astonishing Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. Britain sits at the centre of a vast empire. Industry is transforming daily life, and machines seem capable of doing something new every few months. Yet Buckingham Palace remains a strangely human place inside all that grandeur. The building before you is not exactly the Buckingham Palace of the 21st century. The famous East Front, with the balcony recognised around the world, has not yet assumed its later appearance. During Victoria and Albert's growing family life, the palace has undergone substantial alterations, including the creation of a new eastern range that encloses the courtyard. So your first surprise is that history refuses to pose neatly for photographs that have not been invented yet. You approach slowly. The palace carries the pale, heavy dignity of official architecture, but you notice practical activity almost immediately. Carriages approach and depart, guards maintain their positions, servants slip through less impressive entrances. Deliveries arrive because royalty, inconveniently enough, must still eat breakfast, and quite a lot of breakfast. You hear hooves striking the ground in a measured clop, clop, clop. The air contains damp stone, leather, horse sweat, smoke, and perhaps the faint promise of bread coming from somewhere beyond the walls. Queen Victoria has lived here as sovereign since 1837 when, shortly after becoming queen, she made Buckingham Palace her principal London residence. By 1851 she's 32 years old, married to Prince Albert, and already the mother of 7 children. 7. So if you imagine Buckingham Palace as a silent museum filled with solemn adults standing beside enormous clocks, adjust the picture. There are children here. There are footsteps. There are doors closing unexpectedly, lessons being conducted, servants carrying trays, officials arriving with documents, dogs wandering through privileged spaces, fires needing attention, and adults attempting to preserve dignity while family life happens around them. One less celebrated detail of early Victorian palace life is that the building acquired a reputation for practical shortcomings: heating, ventilation, drainage, and general domestic organisation could all prove troublesome. Even magnificent royal buildings can have awkward plumbing, which is comforting in a peculiar way. Imagine spending a fortune on gilding and still wondering where that smell is coming from. The palace is therefore both symbol and workplace. You pass deeper toward its controlled interior world, where access depends upon rank. Every doorway seems to ask an invisible question. Who are you? A duke, a diplomat, a household officer, a kitchen servant, someone delivering fish? Your answer matters enormously. Victorian Britain loves hierarchy, and the royal household turns hierarchy into something approaching an indoor sport. Different servants possess different responsibilities, privileges, uniforms, wages, and degrees of proximity to the royal family. Even corridors can carry social meaning. You feel the temperature change as you move away from the open air. Stone and enclosed passages preserve the morning chill. Somewhere a fire has already been lit, and the smoky warmth reaches you intermittently. Your footsteps soften against carpeting, then harden again on another surface. The palace seems to breathe through hundreds of rooms. There is an intriguing uncertainty surrounding exactly how comfortable Buckingham Palace felt during these years. Surviving accounts describe both impressive improvements and persistent complaints, and historians continue to disagree over how far Victoria and Albert transformed an awkward royal residence into a genuinely efficient family home during the 1840s and early 1850s. The distinction matters because palaces are usually remembered from the outside. You see facades, portraits, ceremonies. You rarely imagine block drains. Yet the hidden life of this place exists precisely in that contrast. A servant carrying coal does not experience Buckingham Palace as a national monument. To him, it may be a sequence of stairs. A maid does not necessarily see priceless furnishings first. She sees surfaces that gather dust. A cook sees mouths to feed. A footman sees bells waiting to ring. And a guard sees entrances that must remain controlled. You pause near a window and look back toward London. Beyond the palace boundaries lies a capital expanding at extraordinary speed. The census of 1851 will reveal a metropolis containing well over 2 million people. Railways bring newcomers into the city. Construction spreads, commerce accelerates. The streets pulse with sellers, labourers, clerks, servants, gentlemen, children, horses, carts, and the persistent mechanical confidence of the Victorian age. Inside these walls, however, time follows another rhythm. Royal time, household time, breakfast time, audience time, dinner time, and beneath all of them, servant time. That last clock begins earliest, already, while much of the royal family remains asleep. Unseen workers are moving through dim corridors. Fires must be coaxed back into life. Ash must disappear. Water must arrive. Rooms must be made presentable before anyone important notices they were ever untidy. That is the trick of great households. The better the servants perform their work, the less visible the work becomes. You hear something now from deeper inside the building. A faint metallic sound. Perhaps a coal scuttle being lowered carefully onto the floor. Then another sound, the subdued closing of a door. No trumpet announces it, no newspaper records it. But Buckingham Palace is waking. You follow the sound down a quieter passage, away from the grand impression presented to visitors and toward the machinery that keeps royal life moving. The air becomes warmer somewhere nearby. Ash is being swept from a grate. Someone whispers instructions. Someone else is already late, outside. London remains grey beneath its blanket of coal smoke. Inside, the first fires glow orange in the darkness. And long before the Queen opens her eyes, another day in Buckingham Palace has begun. The first fires glow reluctantly, little orange islands beneath blackened grates, and you discover that morning inside Buckingham Palace does not begin with the Queen. It begins with servants. Long before royal curtains are drawn, people are already climbing stairs and crossing passages with the careful speed of workers who understand that efficiency is admirable, but noise is dangerous. The palace at this hour belongs to soft footsteps, rattling coal, brushes against carpet, and the occasional muffled clink of metal. You follow one of the servants carrying a coal scuttle. It is heavier than it looks, naturally. Victorian elegance has a remarkable ability to become somebody else's backache. The servant moves from fireplace to fireplace because central heating, in the modern sense, is not quietly humming behind the walls. Warmth must be produced locally, repeatedly, and laboriously. Fires require fuel, grates require cleaning, ash accumulates, coal dust travels wherever coal dust pleases, and it pleases to travel everywhere. You smell it before you notice it are dry. Mineral scent mixed with yesterday's smoke, kneeling at a grate. A servant clears away residue from the previous fire and prepares another. Kindling catches. Coal follows. Soon a weak flame becomes a dependable glow. Multiply this little operation across an enormous royal residence, and you begin to understand why palace mornings require such an early start. The household operates through carefully divided responsibilities. Victorian domestic service is intensely hierarchical, particularly in an establishment attached to the sovereign. Senior household officers occupy worlds far removed from the young workers performing the dirtiest tasks, while specialised servants attend to everything from clothing and food to horses and lamps. One well-established feature of great 19th century households is the expectation that much heavy cleaning should happen before employers properly enter their daytime rooms. Buckingham Palace magnifies that principle enormously. The royal family should wake into order, ideally. They should not have to witness order being manufactured. You continue along the corridor. A maid appears carrying cleaning equipment. She keeps her movements controlled, conscious that doors nearby may conceal sleeping members of the household. The windows are still dark. She enters a room where the curtains remain closed and begins the small battle against yesterday. Dust settles constantly in Victorian London. Coal fires generate soot inside buildings, while the city outside produces an almost inexhaustible supply of grime. Open a window for fresh air in London cheerfully sends some London back through it. Furniture must be dusted. Carpets must be attended to. Fireplaces need cleaning. Surfaces require polishing. And all of this takes a place in rooms where knocking over the wrong object could produce a particularly memorable conversation with your superior. You imagine trying to explain that, yes, the porcelain was priceless. No, it is no longer technically one object. Perhaps we should move along. Elsewhere, water is beginning its own journey through the palace. In 1851, simply turning a tap does not universally solve every domestic problem with the effortless reliability you expect today. Victorian plumbing is improving rapidly, but water supply and sanitation remain complicated matters even in prestigious buildings. Basins need filling, water needs heating, jugs must be carried. Bathing arrangements demand preparation. Every gallon becomes heavier when somebody has to move it upstairs. You hear water sloshing gently inside a vessel as another servant passes. The sound is oddly soothing until you remember the stairs. The palace contains many of them, up and down, again and again. There is an old-world peculiarity in the way servants can travel through a magnificent building while remaining almost invisible to the people whose comfort depends upon them. Backstairs, service passages, and controlled routes allow household labour to circulate without constantly interrupting formal life. The architecture itself helps maintain social boundaries. Who uses which staircase can matter nearly as much as where the staircase leads. Some surviving descriptions of royal residences suggest servants developed extraordinary mental maps of these internal routes, learning not merely the shortest path, but the socially correct one. A slightly longer journey could be preferable if it prevented an awkward encounter with someone of elevated rank. Imagine your navigation instructions. Turn left at the portrait, continue until the marble table, and whatever you do, do not accidentally surprise a duchess. The darkness gradually thins, now shutters begin to open. A servant approaches a tall window and releases the room from night. Grey morning light spreads across furniture, catching polished wood and gilded edges. Dust motes drift through the beam despite everyone's best efforts. Outside, the palace grounds emerge from shadow, the sky is pale, the grass looks damp, somewhere beyond the walls. London is becoming louder. You can hear carriage traffic increasing, distant wheels merging into a low continuous rumble. The city is waking at the same time as the palace. Though with considerably less concern about disturbing Queen Victoria, inside, another worker checks lamps that have burned through the night or need attention after yesterday's use. Before widespread electric lighting, illumination requires constant human intervention. Oil lamps and candles must be maintained, replaced, trimmed, carried, and watched. Even darkness creates jobs. And there are bells. So many bells. A large household relies upon systems for summoning servants from different parts of the building. Pulls and wires can connect rooms to bells positioned in service areas, each associated with a particular location. When one rings, someone is expected to know what it means. You picture a wall of bells trembling into life. a bedroom, a sitting room, another chamber. To an inexperienced ear, it might sound like decorative chaos. To a trained servant, it is information. There is some uncertainty about precisely how smoothly Buckingham Palace's domestic systems worked during this period. Researchers examining household records and architectural changes have offered differing interpretations of whether Victoria and Albert's reforms substantially reduced old inefficiencies or simply created newer systems within a building that remained stubbornly difficult to manage. Either way, nobody down here has time for an academic conclusion. There is breakfast to prepare. You catch the first stronger aromas from the direction of the kitchens. Bread, hot fat, coffee, perhaps meat. The smell moves along passages much more freely than the servants themselves are allowed to. Upstairs, dressing rooms are being prepared. Fresh water waits in basins and jugs. Clothing will soon require attention. Fires have taken enough chill from certain rooms to make waking less unpleasant. Curtains stand ready to be opened at the appropriate moment. Timing matters. You do not simply burst into a royal bedroom announcing that sunrise has occurred. Even waking can become ceremonial when the sleeper is sovereign, yet before that carefully managed moment. There is a quieter Buckingham Palace that few visitors ever imagine. You stand in it now. The corridors remain mostly empty of courtiers. There are no glittering receptions, no diplomatic conversations, no orchestra, only work. A maid presses a cloth across polished furniture. Another servant carries away ash somewhere below. Kitchen activity grows steadily louder. Footsteps climb a staircase, disappear and return a few minutes later. The palace is being reconstructed for the day, not with bricks and stone, but with hundreds of tiny acts of preparation. A chair positioned correctly, a fire burning steadily, a basin filled, a curtain opened, a speck of soot removed before royal eyes can find it. And that last part is important. Good service in a household like this is measured partly by invisibility. If you notice that the fire is warm, perhaps you do not think about who knelt in cold ashes to make it so. If fresh water waits beside you, you may never consider how far it travelled in somebody's hands. Comfort arrives without its history attached, but you have been awake early enough to see the history. Now another bell sounds. This one produces immediate movement. The morning has crossed an invisible boundary. Bedrooms are stirring. Senior servants begin appearing. Instructions pass quietly from one person to another, and the household hierarchy becomes increasingly apparent as workers who have been labouring since darkness give way to those whose duties require closer contact with the royal family. You follow the traffic downward instead. The polished rooms recede behind you. The corridors become more practical. Decoration grows simpler. The sounds become less restrained. Voices slightly freer. Footsteps quicker. Warmth reaches you from below, carrying the unmistakable smell of cooking. Here the palace changes personality. Above stairs, silence and elegance are being carefully assembled. Below them, people are already negotiating rank, workload, fatigue, gossip, and the eternal question of who has been given the unpleasant job today. You descend another step, then another, and the hidden household opens beneath you. You descend another step, then another, and the polished hush above you begins to dissolve. Down here, Buckingham Palace sounds different. Doors swing more briskly, boots strike harder floors, crockery knocks against crockery, someone calls a short instruction from farther along the passage. And another voice answers without the careful softness expected near royal apartments. The air feels warmer too, carrying cold smoke, damp wool, soap, cooked food, and that unmistakable atmosphere of many people already several hours into their working day. This is the palace below stairs. Not one neat underground kingdom, of course, but a network of service spaces, passages, storerooms, kitchens, pantries, offices, workrooms, and staircases through which the practical business of royalty moves. You pass a young servant hurrying with a tray. He barely looks at you. There is no time. Royal grandeur, you are discovering, runs on deadlines and legs, mostly legs. A large Victorian household depends upon hierarchy almost as firmly as the army does at Buckingham Palace. That hierarchy becomes especially elaborate because domestic service overlaps with the formal organisation of the royal household. Senior officers, specialised attendants, pages, footmen, cooks, maids, and numerous other employees occupy carefully distinguished positions. Your job determines more than your work. It influences where you go, whom you answer to, what clothing you wear, and how close you may come to the royal family. A young worker entering service does not simply become a servant. That convenient modern label hides an entire miniature society. You turn into a passage where several doors lead toward working rooms. The walls are plainer here. Function matters more than display. Nobody expects a visiting ambassador to admire this corridor, which is probably a relief to the corridor. A bell rings somewhere nearby. Someone immediately changes direction. You remember the bells from upstairs, those small mechanical demands connecting comfortable rooms to distant labour. Down here, their meaning is sharper. A bell is not merely a sound, it is an instruction without a voice. You are wanted, now, and preferably 5 seconds ago. Servants learn patterns, they recognise routines, anticipate needs, and understand which requests are urgent. Experience becomes a form of invisible expertise. The best servant does not merely respond, the best servant predicts. You watch a footman pass in clothing far more formal than that worn by workers engaged in dirty cleaning tasks. Liveried servants contribute to the visual theatre of monarchy, particularly when guests are present. Their appearance matters because they can be seen. That distinction is revealing. Some palace workers are meant to be visible but unobtrusive. Others are meant to vanish almost completely. The closer you look, the more the palace resembles a stage production in which most of the cast is permanently backstage. Except the performance lasts all day, and tomorrow there is another one. One established reality of 19th century domestic service is the extraordinary length of the working day. Hours vary according to role, rank and circumstances, but early rising and late duties are common, especially in large households where entertaining stretches into the evening. For the lowest ranking workers, privacy is limited, free time can be scarce. Fatigue becomes familiar. You imagine waking before dawn to clean fireplaces, working through the day, and finally reaching bed after people upstairs have finished enjoying an evening that you helped create. The phrase royal service sounds rather romantic until your feet begin to hurt. Still, employment in a royal household can carry prestige. Association with the sovereign may offer status unavailable in an ordinary domestic position. Some employees remain in royal service for years, even decades. Long service can create deep familiarity with routines and personalities that outsiders never witness. And familiarity produces gossip. Of course it does. Human beings do not become less interested in gossip simply because the ceilings are taller. In a corner near a service area, you can almost imagine fragments passing quietly between workers who seemed irritated this morning. Which visitor stayed longer than expected? Which child refused a lesson? Who has annoyed a superior? Which servant might be leaving? Nothing needs to be scandalous. Often the most persistent gossip is wonderfully ordinary. Someone is courting someone. Someone has received a letter. Someone has taken the better portion of supper. Civilization survives another crisis. There is a curious little feature of elite domestic life that makes this underground social world even more complicated. Servants themselves can sometimes expect service from servants of lower rank. Senior employees may enjoy privileges that make their lives dramatically different from those of junior workers. Hierarchy reproduces itself all the way downward, so even below stairs, you're not necessarily among equals. A senior servant might possess a private or semi-private room, better meals, greater authority, and more control over personal time. A junior worker might share sleeping quarters and perform exhausting tasks with far less independence. Where you sit can matter. What you eat can matter. Even who eats with whom can matter. You begin to understand why etiquette is not confined to royal drawing rooms. Below stairs has etiquette of its own. Perhaps it is less gilded, but it can be equally strict. You enter the vicinity of a pantry, shelves hold the equipment necessary for serving meals and refreshments. Valuable tableware requires supervision, cleaning, counting, and storage. Silver does not polish itself, despite centuries of aristocratic optimism on the subject. The repetitive work leaves its mark. Hands become rough from water and cleaning substances. Heat reddens faces. Coal blackens fingers. Carrying trays strengthens arms. Standing for hours teaches the body exactly how long an hour can be. Yet these workers are not merely anonymous machinery. Each carries a private life into the palace. Letters arrive from parents. Wages are saved. Friendships form. Romances begin carefully. Arguments flare and cool. Some employees dream of promotion. Others dream of leaving service altogether. A young maid might calculate how long she can tolerate the work against what she can earn elsewhere. A footman might hope experience in a royal household opens doors later. There are rules governing conduct, and dismissal can be frightening because employment often determines accommodation as well as income. Lose the position and you may lose your bed with it. That makes obedience practical, not merely ceremonial. Researchers still debate how accurately the surviving official records capture this emotional world of palace servants. Payrolls, household regulations, correspondence, memoirs, and architectural plans can reveal names, duties, wages, and routines, but they rarely preserve every whispered complaint or private joke. Some historians therefore picture royal service as unusually secure and prestigious, while others emphasize how restrictive and exhausting such employment could remain. The truth probably changes depending on whose shoes you borrow, and which staircase those shoes are climbing. You continue farther along. A door opens and releases a stronger gust of kitchen heat. Copper gleams in the distance. Something rich and savoury is being prepared, but you do not follow it yet. The kitchens have their own enormous story waiting for you later. For now, you remain among the people moving between worlds. A servant emerges carrying something destined upstairs and instinctively adjusts posture before leaving the service area. That tiny transformation catches your attention. Down here, shoulders relax slightly. Up there, the performance resumes. You follow at a distance. The corridor narrows, then joins another passage. Voices fade behind you. The palace seems to arrange people as carefully as it arranges furniture, directing workers toward the places where they are needed while keeping the machinery of service discreetly out of sight. Ahead, morning preparations are becoming more personal. Water has been carried, fires are warm, clothing has been prepared. The Queen herself will soon enter the visible part of her day, but even that apparently private act of getting dressed requires assistance, organisation, fabric, pins, brushes, jewellery, and practised hands. You leave the louder service passages and climb again. The smell of kitchens weakens, the carpets soften your steps. Conversation becomes quieter. Somewhere above you waits a dressing room, and inside it the transformation from Victoria the woman waking in her home to Victoria the Queen seen by her household is about to begin. Somewhere above you waits a dressing room, and inside it the transformation from Victoria, the woman waking in her home, to Victoria the Queen seen by her household is about to begin. You approach through a corridor where the morning has finally established itself. Daylight now reaches through tall windows. Although London offers its usual diluted version of sunshine, filtered through cloud and smoke, fires have warmed the principal rooms, fresh water has arrived, clothing has been inspected, brushes, combs, towels, pins, ribbons, and all the little objects that make respectable Victorian appearance possible stand ready. Nothing about getting dressed is quite as simple when you are Queen. Victoria's 32 in 1851, no longer the inexperienced 18-year-old who inherited the throne in 1837. She's been married to Prince Albert for 11 years, has 7 children, and lives under an extraordinary mixture of public scrutiny and private domestic routine. Yet this morning begins with very ordinary requirements. You need to wash, your hair needs attention, and eventually you must find something to wear. The difference is that you have attendants. Privacy in royal life is therefore a flexible concept. Victoria's personal attendants include women occupying prestigious positions within the female royal household, while more practical duties are performed by servants whose work rarely attracts the attention given to aristocratic ladies surrounding the sovereign. Access to the Queen is carefully regulated, and proximity itself can signal status. You cannot simply wander in carrying a hairbrush. There are levels to this. Always levels. You enter quietly enough to hear fabric moving. A dress waits nearby, its shape unmistakably Victorian. The fashionable female silhouette of the early 1850s emphasises a narrow waist and increasingly broad skirts. Though the great cage crinoline craze still lies a few years ahead, for now, volume can be created through layers of petticoats, layers upon layers. You glance at the arrangement and reconsider every complaint you have ever made about choosing a shirt. Getting dressed involves undergarments first, then the structural and visible layers that produce the desired silhouette. A chemise sits against the body. Stays or a corset shape the torso. Petticoats add warmth and fullness. Stockings, shoes, and the dress itself complete only part of the process. There may be collars, cuffs, ribbons, shawls, gloves, and other accessories depending on the occasion, and because Victoria is Queen, the occasion matters. Quiet family mourning does not demand exactly the same appearance as receiving a minister's. Attending a formal function, sitting for a portrait, or appearing before a court gathering, clothes speak. They announce rank, respectability, circumstance, mourning, celebration, and taste before anyone opens their mouth. Victoria understands this language extremely well. You hear the soft rasp of fabric as another layer is adjusted. The sensation would be immediately noticeable to you linen against skin, tightly fitted material around the waist, heavier cloth settling over the body. Rooms may be warm near the fireplace and cool only a few steps away. So clothing also provides practical protection against the uneven temperatures of a 19th century palace. Then comes the hair. Victoria's portraits from this period often show her dark hair arranged smoothly and carefully, commonly parted in the centre and dressed around the sides, with variations depending upon fashion and formality. Hair preparation requires patience. Brushes pass repeatedly through long strands. Pins disappear into arrangements that somehow depend upon dozens of tiny objects, while pretending to depend upon none. A misplaced pin can be uncomfortable for hours. Royalty, it turns out, does not grant immunity from being stabbed gently in the scalp by fashion. There is something wonderfully mundane about that. You can imagine an attendant concentrating closely, fingers working with practiced precision while Victoria talks, reads something, considers the day's obligations, or simply waits. Her relationship with clothing is more interesting than the stiff portraits might suggest. Victoria enjoys fashion and jewellery, especially during the years of her marriage to Albert. The permanently black-clad widow of later popular memory does not yet exist. That transformation will come after Albert's death in 1861. In 1851, colour still belongs to her wardrobe. So does ornament. Jewellery carries both decorative and emotional meaning. Victoria possesses magnificent pieces associated with monarchy, but she also values objects connected personally with Albert and their children. A bracelet can be political display, it can also be sentimental. The two worlds overlap constantly. One especially charming fashion of the Victorian court involves jewellery incorporating miniature portraits, locks of hair, initials, or other intimate family references. To modern eyes, wearing someone's hair as jewellery may seem slightly unsettling. To Victorians, hair can preserve affection. It survives separation. It becomes a physical memory, and when nearly everything around you is ceremonial, perhaps a tiny private token feels particularly precious. You watch a piece of jewellery being selected. Not necessarily a crown. That is another modern misconception worth quietly placing back on the shelf. A monarch does not wander through ordinary palace mornings wearing full ceremonial regalia like someone who has become trapped in a souvenir shop. Most royal days require considerably more practical dress. Even the Queen has paperwork. Imagine signing government documents while balancing a crown the size of a decorative fruit bowl. No thank you. The distinction between private Victoria and public Victoria becomes especially visible during dressing. The woman standing before a mirror is simultaneously wife, mother, sovereign, employer, and symbol. Her body is personal, her appearance is public property. Newspapers discuss royal clothing, artists reproduce it, courtiers observe it, fashion responds to it. That creates pressure even within apparently intimate routines. There is disagreement among biographers about how far Victoria's clothing choices in these years should be understood as deliberate political presentation rather than personal preference shaped by circumstance. Her diaries and correspondence reveal strong tastes and emotions, yet royal appearance inevitably carries public meaning whether she intends every detail to communicate something or not. You look toward the mirror. That ambiguity seems perfectly suited to the reflection. A woman sees herself. A nation sees a queen. The attendants see their work. And you, standing invisibly at the edge of the room, see how much labour separates waking from appearing. A sleeve is straightened. A fastening is checked. The fall of the skirt is corrected. Hair is inspected from another angle. Perhaps perfume or scented preparations add a faint floral note to the room, competing gently with coal smoke from the fireplace. Victorian personal washing is more regular and varied than the crude stereotype that everyone in the 19th century simply avoids water. Full immersion bathing may require more preparation than in your bathroom, but washing with basins, cloths, soap, and warm water is an ordinary part of respectable hygiene. For the Queen, servants make the process easier. The water arrives because someone carries or prepares it. Used water disappears because someone removes it. Towels become clean again somewhere beyond sight. Once more, comfort hides labour. You remember the servants you pass below stairs, the maid with roughened hands, the worker carrying coal, the person climbing with water. Their mourning converges here. Every polished surface and warmed room represents somebody else's earlier footsteps. Victoria's day is now gathering momentum. There may be correspondence to consider. Household matters, family obligations, political business, visitors, and engagements. The sovereign's constitutional role means government papers and communication with ministers form a regular part of life. Even within a palace often remembered mainly for balls and balconies, and nearby, another person has already been working, Prince Albert. His appetite for organisation is formidable. He takes an active interest in administration, art, science, education, architecture, and the management of royal life. In this particular year, his energies are inseparable from the great exhibition, whose immense glass building in Hyde Park has become one of the wonders of the age. You can almost feel his influence before you enter his working world. Schedules become important, documents multiply, order becomes a virtue. Victoria may be dressed for the day, but the palace is not merely preparing to look royal, it is preparing to work. An attendant makes one final adjustment. The Queen moves away from the mirror behind her. Brushes and garments remain to be dealt with, because even a completed dressing routine creates another round of invisible tasks. You follow the morning onward. Somewhere beyond these rooms, paper waits in neat piles. Correspondence crosses desks, plans demand attention, and Prince Albert is helping turn domestic royal life into something increasingly organised, purposeful, and unmistakably Victorian. Somewhere beyond these rooms, paper waits in neat piles. Correspondence crosses desks, plans demand attention, and Prince Albert is helping turn domestic royal life into something increasingly organised, purposeful, and unmistakably Victorian. You move toward that quieter territory now, where royal power looks less like a throne and more like a desk. The atmosphere changes almost imperceptibly. There is still polish, fine furniture, carefully arranged objects, and the unmistakable dignity of a royal residence. But here you sense concentration. Papers have been opened, letters wait for answers, memoranda require attention, pens sit ready beside ink. A clock measures the morning with irritating efficiency. Prince Albert is 29 years old in 1851. He's been Victoria's husband for 11 years, and although he is not king, he has gradually established a substantial role within the royal household and within Victoria's working life. His position has never been entirely straightforward. As a German-born prince arriving in Britain, he initially faces suspicion from sections of the public and political establishment. By this point, however, he has become far more influential. You picture him bending over documents. Albert possesses a strong appetite for order. He likes systems. He likes improvement. He likes the idea that institutions might function better tomorrow than they function today. This is admirable unless, of course, you're the institution being improved. Then you may prefer that His Royal Highness discovers a relaxing hobby. Albert takes a serious interest in household expenditure and administration. The royal establishment he enters through marriage is burdened by traditions, overlapping responsibilities, and habits inherited from earlier reigns. He becomes involved in attempts to rationalize arrangements and make royal domestic life more efficient. Efficiency is not glamorous. You rarely see paintings titled Prince Consort Reviews Household Accounts while slightly annoyed by wasteful purchasing. Yet this administrative side of monarchy matters. A palace consumes enormous quantities of food, fuel, fabric, candles, wine, maintenance materials, and human labour. Waste multiplied across such a household becomes expensive very quickly. You remember those coal scuttles moving upstairs before dawn? Every lump of coal costs something, every candle costs something, every servant receives wages, every horse eats, even Majesty has invoices. Albert's concern with organisation extends beyond household bookkeeping. He's deeply interested in education, science, manufacturing, design, and technological progress. These interests converge spectacularly in 1851 with the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of all nations. If you glance mentally beyond Buckingham Palace towards Hyde Park, you can almost see the enormous Crystal Palace glittering through the London haze. The exhibition opens in May. Its vast prefabricated glass and iron structure houses objects and inventions from Britain and many other parts of the world. Machinery, textiles, decorative arts, raw materials, scientific instruments, and manufactured goods turn the building into a dazzling catalogue of Victorian ambition. Albert serves as president of the Royal Commission associated with the project and becomes one of its most prominent champions. For him, it is not merely a giant room full of impressive things. It represents education, international exchange, industry, and improvement. The project also attracts skepticism before opening. Critics worry about crowds, foreigners, disorder, financial failure, and various other disasters that do not ultimately materialize in the dramatic form predicted. Victorian society, you discover, is perfectly capable of panicking about a major public event months before attending it enthusiastically. Some traditions never die. Inside the palace, the exhibition adds another layer to Albert's already crowded working life. Letters arrive. Decisions accumulate. Meetings consume time. You hear paper sliding across wood. A secretary or official may assist with correspondence. But Albert remains remarkably industrious himself. His surviving papers reveal a man involved in a wide range of subjects, sometimes down to details that another royal consort might happily have left to somebody else. One slightly amusing aspect of his reputation among contemporaries is precisely this seriousness. Albert can appear intensely earnest, disciplined, and determined to use his position constructively. You imagine asking him whether he intends to spend the afternoon doing absolutely nothing. The silence becomes uncomfortable. Perhaps you should not have asked. Yet Albert's private life is warmer than the stereotype of the permanently solemn reformer suggests. He and Victoria share a passionate marriage, though certainly not a frictionless one. They argue, they reconcile, they raise children. Victoria can be emotionally intense, while Albert often presents himself as the calmer, more controlled partner. Their relationship also contains a political complication. Victoria is sovereign, Albert is her husband. Victorian assumptions about marriage generally place husbands in positions of authority within their families, but constitutional reality makes this marriage fundamentally unusual. The wife wears the crown, the husband seeks a meaningful role without possessing the sovereign's legal position. Exactly how their partnership changes the exercise of royal influence remains open to interpretation. Some historians emphasize Albert's growing importance in shaping Victoria's views and administrative habits, while others caution against imagining that he simply takes control behind the scenes. Their surviving correspondence suggests something more fluid cooperation, persuasion, disagreement, dependence, and shifting influence according to circumstance. You can feel that complexity in these working rooms. 2 desks might represent 2 personalities, 2 sets of papers, 1 marriage intertwined with the machinery of monarchy. Albert's organisational instincts also touch family life. He takes fatherhood seriously and develops strong ideas about the children's education. Royal children are not simply allowed to roam palace corridors until adulthood happens to them. There will be lessons, schedules, expectations, moral instruction, languages, geography, history, religion, and probably the occasional moment when a royal child looks at a timetable and experiences the ancient human desire to hide under furniture. Albert wants his children prepared for their future positions. He and Victoria are building not merely a household, but a dynasty. By 1851, their eldest daughter, Victoria, known within the family as Vicky, is 10, Albert Edward, the future Edward VII, is 9, Alice is 8, Alfred 7, Helena 5, Louise 3, and little Arthur is approaching his first birthday. 7 children under 11. Even with nurses, governesses, attendants, and palace rooms, that is not a quiet household. A toy appears where no administrator planned it. A child's voice travels along a corridor. A lesson runs late. Someone becomes ill. Someone quarrels. Someone wants mama. The contrast is wonderful. On Albert's desk may sit papers concerning international industry and royal administration. Beyond the door, somebody's child has probably lost something. Albert also embraces new technologies with unusual enthusiasm for a royal figure of his generation. Photography particularly fascinates both him and Victoria. The couple become important early patrons and collectors of the new medium. Recognizing that photographs offer possibilities quite different from traditional painted portraiture, there is something beautifully appropriate about them embracing photography. A monarchy rooted in centuries of ceremony is learning to live with a machine that captures light. Technology enters the palace not as an enemy of tradition, but as another tool. Railways are changing travel, telegraphy is accelerating communication. Photography is changing memory. Industrial production is changing the objects surrounding everyday life. And Albert wants the royal household to engage with this modern world. Still, modernization has limits. The fire beside you burns coal. Letters are written by hand. Messages travel through servants. A bell summons a person rather than activating a device, so progress arrives unevenly. That may be one of the strangest sensations of 1851. You can stand inside a palace where centuries-old etiquette survives beside conversations about technologies that will reshape the future. Albert seems comfortable in that contradiction. He respects monarchy but wants usefulness. He values art but studies manufacturing. He enjoys family life but organizes it carefully. Even leisure can acquire purpose. Perhaps that is why his influence becomes so deeply embedded in the palace. He's not content merely to inhabit royal rooms. He wants them to function. You leave the desk behind as the sounds of family life grow clearer. A door opens. Somewhere ahead. A child's voice rises. Then another answers. Small footsteps move rapidly enough to suggest that somebody has temporarily forgotten the dignity expected of royal offspring. You follow. The administrative palace begins to soften around you. Maps and memoranda give way to books, toys, lesson materials, nurses, governesses, and the peculiar controlled chaos of childhood. Albert may organise the timetable. Victoria may wear the crown. But behind another palace door, 7 young people are learning that being born royal does not exempt you from arithmetic. Albert may organise the timetable. Victoria may wear the crown. But behind another palace door, 7 young people are learning that being born royal does not exempt you from arithmetic. You hear them before you properly enter their world. A chair scrapes lightly across the floor. Pages turn. A child's voice attempts an answer with the careful hesitation of someone hoping confidence might compensate for uncertainty. Somewhere nearby comes the softer murmur of an adult correcting pronunciation. The royal nursery is not one room containing 7 children and a heroic woman trying to prevent catastrophe. It is a broader domestic world of bedrooms, schoolrooms, play spaces, attendants, nurses, governesses, tutors, routines, and carefully supervised movement. By 1851, Victoria and Albert's family is large enough to feel almost like a small institution inside the larger institution of Buckingham Palace. Their eldest child, Victoria, or Vicky, is 10, Albert Edward, called Bertie within the family and destined to become Edward VII, is 9, Alice is 8, Alfred is 7, Helena is 5, Louise is 3, Arthur, the youngest, is still a baby, and more children will come, 9 in total. Eventually, you might imagine that being born into this family means spending childhood eating cake from silver plates while servants applaud whenever you successfully put on a shoe. Unfortunately for Bertie, his father has other ideas. Albert approaches education seriously, very seriously. He believes disciplined instruction can shape character, and the children's education is planned with their future responsibilities firmly in mind. Lessons can include languages, history, geography, religion, literature, mathematics, music, drawing, and other subjects considered appropriate to their positions and ages. The educational program also reflects the parents' ambitions. Vicky shows considerable intellectual promise and is regarded as bright and quick. Bertie proves more difficult to fit into the system designed for him. His parents worry about his concentration and academic progress, concerns that will follow him through much of his youth. You watch an imaginary lesson unfold, a map lies open, a tutor points toward a place. The child must identify it. Outside, horses move through the palace grounds. Inside, Europe has been reduced to coloured shapes on paper and an adult is asking inconvenient questions about rivers. The smell here is different from the service corridors. There is paper, wood, perhaps chalk, warm fabric, and the faint dusty scent of books. A fire makes the room comfortable. Toys occupy shelves or corners, although ideally not the middle of the lesson, ideally. One curious detail of Victoria and Albert's family life is their enthusiasm for giving the children experiences that imitate ordinary domestic activity. At Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, for example, the royal children have their own Swiss cottage, where they can practice cooking and household tasks and tend garden plots. The idea is educational, practical, wholesome, and slightly amusing when you remember that these children possess servants who could perform almost every one of those tasks for them. There is something wonderfully Victorian about arranging an elaborate private cottage so royal children can learn simplicity. Still, the intention is genuine. Albert particularly wants education to extend beyond memorizing facts. The children should develop useful habits, practical knowledge, moral discipline, and appreciation for the natural world. At Buckingham Palace? However, childhood remains wrapped in protocol. A royal child does not belong solely to a family. He or she belongs partly to the future. Bertie is heir after his mother. Vicky may eventually marry into another European royal house. Every child could become part of a diplomatic and dynastic network stretching across the continent. That knowledge sits quietly behind the toys. You look at Vicky. In only a few years, discussion of her future marriage will become very real. She will eventually marry Prince Frederick William of Prussia and move to Germany. But in 1851, she's still a child. She learns, she plays, she writes, she seeks approval, and like her siblings, she negotiates the complicated emotional weather of having Victoria and Albert as parents. Victoria loves her children, but motherhood does not always fit comfortably with the sentimental ideal later attached to her family image. Pregnancy is physically and emotionally difficult for her, and she sometimes expresses frustration with babies and the demands of repeated childbearing. Her honesty can sound startling to modern ears because the 19th century image of motherhood is so often wrapped in softness and idealization. Actual mothers inconveniently remain human. Even queens. Albert is deeply involved in educational planning. While governesses and tutors provide much of the daily instruction and supervision, the children therefore grow up surrounded by adults whose roles overlap between affection, discipline, education, and service. You can imagine how strange this feels from a child's perspective. Mama and Papa are nearby, but so are nurses, governesses, tutors, ladies, servants, officials, guards, Privacy is never complete. Even misbehaviour may acquire witnesses. There is no surviving record of every nursery quarrel, every joke, every bedtime complaint, and every whispered conspiracy among siblings, which leaves an important gap in the picture. Biographers continue to interpret the children's later recollections differently. Some see a fundamentally loving household burdened by demanding expectations, while others place greater emphasis on the emotional strain created by Albert's educational ideals and Victoria's intense temperament. You listen to the room rather than choosing a side. A child laughs, another complains, a grown-up intervenes. That sounds like family life. The nursery also carries more serious anxiety. Illness. Victorian parents know that childhood can be medically precarious. Even privileged families cannot completely escape infectious disease, and memories of earlier royal deaths remain close enough to make health a constant concern. The palace has access to physicians and excellent material resources, but 19th century medicine still lacks antibiotics, modern germ theory in its fully accepted form, and many treatments you would now consider basic. A fever can become frightening quickly. A cough receives attention. A rash causes questions. Food, fresh air, exercise, sleep, and bodily habits are watched because maintaining health is understood partly through daily regimen. You notice a nurse checking the baby. Arthur is still small enough that his world revolves around feeding, sleeping, warmth, and adults hovering nearby. He has no idea that he's living inside one of Europe's most famous buildings. The carpet is simply carpet. Mama is mama. A shiny object is vastly more interesting than constitutional monarchy. Lucky Arthur. The older children understand more. They know their mother is queen, they see ceremonies, they encounter distinguished visitors, they travel between royal residences. They learn that adults bow. But children possess a talent for making the extraordinary ordinary. Buckingham Palace is simply home because it is where they wake up. Imagine Bertie racing through a familiar corridor that visitors approach with trembling reverence. To him, perhaps it is merely the corridor leading somewhere more interesting. You follow the children's day beyond lessons. There is movement and exercise when circumstances permit. Music occupies an important place in family life. Victoria and Albert both enjoy music, and the children grow up in an environment where performance and artistic accomplishment are valued. Drawing matters too, so does reading. The royal parents take considerable interest in recording family life through paintings, sketches, photographs, albums, and personal keepsakes. Childhood is being remembered almost while it happens, and yet the palace nursery remains connected to the enormous workforce you encounter downstairs. Children need meals, clothes need washing, rooms need cleaning, fires need tending, shoes need repairing, toys break, sheets become dirty. Even the smallest prince generates laundry with impressive democratic enthusiasm. A servant appears with something for the nursery. Another removes something. The hidden machinery continues. Then the atmosphere begins to shift toward food. Lessons pause. The household moves according to its many overlapping meal schedules, and aromas from deeper within the palace become harder to ignore. Roasted meat, warm bread, stock simmering somewhere below, butter, perhaps pastry. Your stomach, which has shown admirable respect for monarchy until now, makes its own constitutional demand. You leave the maps and lesson books behind. The children's voices fade as you move toward a staircase, following the invisible trail of heat and scent downward. Remember the kitchen door you passed earlier. Releasing that sudden breath of warmth, now you return to it. This time you do not walk past. Beyond it lies an industrial world of knives, copper pans, ovens, fires, ingredients, shouted instructions, and astonishing quantities of food, all working toward the illusion that royal meals simply appear. You step closer. The heat reaches your face, and somewhere inside. Buckingham Palace is preparing to eat. The heat reaches your face, and somewhere inside. Buckingham Palace is preparing to eat. You step through the kitchen doorway and immediately lose any lingering idea that royal food appears beneath silver covers through some mysterious process known only to monarchy. This is work. Serious, hot, hurried work. The first sensation is warmth. Great cooking fires and ranges push heat into rooms already crowded with moving bodies. Copper pans catch the light. Knives strike boards in quick, controlled rhythms, water splashes. Metal scrapes against metal, a door opens, someone passes through carrying ingredients, and the door closes again before you have properly identified what was on the tray. Then there is the smell. Roasting meat dominates for a moment, followed by onions, stock, bread, butter, herbs, pastry, smoke, and something sweet enough to make you consider abandoning historical observation in favour of theft. You resist, barely. Feeding Buckingham Palace means feeding far more than Victoria, Albert, and 7 children. The royal household includes numerous servants and officials, while dinners, receptions, visiting dignitaries, and special occasions can dramatically increase the number of mouths requiring attention. And not everyone eats the same thing. Rank follows you into the kitchen. Different tables within a great household may receive different dishes and standards of provision. Food is therefore another map of hierarchy. What reaches a senior household official is not necessarily what reaches a junior servant. Even leftovers can have status. Nothing about this place is allowed to remain socially uncomplicated. You move aside as a kitchen worker carries a heavy vessel past you. The physical demands are obvious. Cooks and assistants spend long periods standing near intense heat. Pots are heavy. Water must be moved. Ingredients require cleaning, chopping, pounding, stirring, straining, roasting, boiling, baking, and careful timing. There are no digital thermometers, no electric mixers, no refrigerator humming politely in a corner. Judgment lives in eyes, hands, noses, experience, and habit. A skilled cook knows how a sauce should look, how dough should feel, how strongly a fire should burn, how long meat needs without consulting a glowing screen that announces 17 remaining minutes. Victorian elite cookery can be extremely elaborate. Formal dining often follows the fashionable service styles of the period, with multiple dishes appearing in carefully arranged courses or table settings. French culinary influence is powerful in aristocratic and royal circles, and French terminology carries considerable prestige. At Victoria's court, one particularly important culinary figure is Charles Elmer Francatelli, who serves as chief cook to the Queen during the 1840s and later publishes influential cookbooks. By 1851, he is no longer occupying that palace position, but his career offers a useful glimpse into the sophistication expected from royal kitchens. His published recipes range from grand dishes to more economical food intended for ordinary households. A former royal chef teaching the public how to make dinner is, in its own way, rather modern. You peer toward a preparation table. Meat is everywhere in Victorian upper-class dining. Beef, mutton, lamb, poultry, game when available. Fish also occupies an important place, especially when freshness and supply permit. London's expanding transport networks help bring ingredients into the capital with increasing speed. Railways are quietly changing dinner. Food that once travelled slowly can reach urban markets more efficiently. Fish from coastal areas, produce from the countryside, dairy goods, and other perishables move through increasingly interconnected systems, but speed does not eliminate uncertainty. There is no uninterrupted refrigerated supply chain protecting every ingredient from farm or sea to royal plate. Freshness must be judged. Storage matters. Season matters. Weather matters. A kitchen serving the sovereign cannot casually shrug and announce that the fish seems mostly fine. You hope. Cold storage presents its own challenges. Ice can be collected, purchased, stored in ice houses, and used to preserve food or create chilled dishes. Wealthy households have far greater access to such arrangements than ordinary families. The very existence of elaborate iced desserts in an age without electric refrigeration feels slightly like cheating. Imagine arriving at a Victorian dinner and being served something frozen. You stare at it. You know there is no freezer. Somewhere behind the dessert is an entire logistical operation involving winter, insulation, storage, labour, and someone who probably wishes you appreciated the sorbet more. Sugar adds another layer to the palace diet. By the 19th century, Sugar consumption in Britain has risen enormously compared with earlier centuries, supported by global trade and imperial systems whose history includes brutal exploitation and slavery. Although Britain abolishes slavery throughout most of its empire in the 1830s, the wealth and consumption patterns created by earlier plantation economies remain embedded in Victorian life. A spoonful of sweetness can carry a very long history. Tea does too, so does coffee. So do spices. The royal table gathers products from networks stretching far beyond London, making dinner an unexpectedly global event. You inhale again. Perhaps pepper, perhaps cinnamon, perhaps nutmeg. Ingredients travel thousands of miles so that someone in Buckingham Palace can decide the pudding needs a little more flavour. One easily overlooked kitchen problem is timing. Food must travel. The grand dining rooms are not necessarily conveniently attached to the hottest stove. Dishes prepared below or away from formal rooms have to be transported through service routes while remaining presentable and, ideally, warm. This produces an eternal conflict between architecture and dinner. The sauce is ready, the guests are waiting, the corridor is long, go. You watch servants organise dishes for movement. Plates must be warmed where appropriate. Covers help protect food. Trays require balance. Routes need to remain clear. A dropped dish is not merely inconvenient, it delays service, it creates noise, it wastes expensive food, and depending on who's waiting upstairs, it may generate the sort of silence from a superior that feels considerably worse than shouting. The kitchens themselves operate through divisions of labour. Senior cooks command authority, while assistants handle specialised or repetitive tasks. Pastry work, roasting, sauces, vegetables, and other preparations can demand different skills within a large establishment. The exact organisation changes over time, and palace records do not always allow modern researchers to reconstruct every ordinary working moment with confidence. Menus and accounts tell you what is purchased and served more readily than they tell you whether a kitchen assistant secretly hates peeling vegetables on rainy Tuesdays. That missing human texture matters. Official records preserve quantities. Life happens between them. You can still infer plenty from the scale. Flour arrives. Coal arrives, meat arrives, vegetables arrive, wine arrives, all must be received, inspected, stored, recorded, prepared, served, and eventually cleared away. The kitchen never experiences a meal as a single event. Breakfast overlaps with preparation for luncheon. Luncheon overlaps with dinner. Dinner may overlap with preparations for tomorrow, and entertaining can expand everything. A formal royal dinner demands precision because food participates in ceremony. Table linens must be immaculate. Glassware gleams, silver shines, servants coordinate movement, guests sit according to rank and expectation. By the time a dish reaches the dining room, almost all evidence of kitchen struggle has disappeared. That is the illusion. You see the roast, not the person turning or tending it. You admire the pastry, not the overheated cook. You taste the sauce, not the hours. Royal dining depends upon making effort invisible. Again, the same principle followed you from the morning fires to Victoria's dressing room, and here it returns surrounded by butter. A bell or message signals another stage of service. Suddenly, movement becomes sharper. Dishes leave. Servants straighten. The kitchen exhales briefly, then immediately begins preparing whatever comes next. You follow a tray only part of the way before another route catches your attention. Empty plates will return. Soiled cloth will return. Grease will return. Ash will remain. Every beautiful meal creates a less beautiful aftermath, and the palace cannot simply close the kitchen door and pretend not to notice. Someone washes, someone scrubs, someone removes waste, someone cleans the floor. Your eyes drift toward a smudge of soot near the working area, then toward the passage beyond. Once you notice dirt in Buckingham Palace, you begin seeing the enormous campaign required to keep it under control. Coal dust upstairs, kitchen grease below, mud from shoes, wax from candles, ash from fires, dust settling over furniture. Hundreds of beds, towels, tablecloths, carpets, windows, grates, pots, plates, and chamber vessels quietly demanding human attention. You leave the heat behind, carrying the smell of roasting food with you for several steps. Ahead, a maid bends toward a surface with brush and cloth in hand. Dinner may be magnificent, but somebody still has to clean up. Dinner may be magnificent, but somebody still has to clean up. The maid ahead of you moves her cloth across the surface in small, practiced circles. She does not admire the furniture, she examines it. There is a difference. You might enter a palace room and notice carved wood, gilding, paintings, mirrors, rich fabrics, and the pleasant possibility that everything around you costs more than your house. She notices fingerprints, dust, soot, wax, a mark near the edge that definitely was not there yesterday. The hidden life of Buckingham Palace is, to a surprising degree, a war against dirt, and dirt has reinforcements. London in 1851 burns tremendous quantities of coal. Smoke rises from domestic fireplaces, workshops, factories, and countless chimneys, contributing to the dark haze associated with the Victorian capital. Fine particles settle on buildings, clothes, windows, curtains, furniture, and lungs. Buckingham Palace cannot place itself outside London's atmosphere simply because a queen lives there. Open a window and fresh air enters, accompanied by several uninvited members of the Industrial Revolution. Keep the window closed and ventilation becomes its own problem. Choose wisely. You follow the maid into a larger room. Morning light exposes everything. Dust becomes especially irritating when sunlight reveals it floating beautifully through the air, almost as if attempting to make its failure to disappear artistic. A brush moves across upholstery, a cloth follows polished wood. Objects must sometimes be lifted, cleaned around, and returned to precisely the correct position. Furniture needs care appropriate to its materials. Metalwork requires polishing. Mirrors and glass demand attention. Then there are carpets. Large carpets are luxurious beneath royal feet, but they trap dirt with astonishing enthusiasm before modern vacuum cleaners. Keeping them clean requires brushes, brooms, carpet sweepers of various kinds as technology develops, and sometimes the removal and beating of rugs or carpets. Imagine carrying substantial carpet outside. Now imagine that it belongs to Queen Victoria. Suddenly you become extremely interested in not tearing anything. Heavy curtains create similar challenges. Upholstery gathers dust. Decorative textiles require care. Chandeliers and high fittings sit inconveniently above human reach, as though deliberately testing the commitment of cleaners. The palace is filled with surfaces. Every surface becomes a task eventually. You hear the familiar scrape of a fireplace being attended to. Coal fires are warm and comforting, but they produce ash, cinders, soot, and dust. Grates require repeated cleaning. Coal itself must be carried through the building without spreading black residue everywhere. An ambition easier stated than achieved. A servant kneels near the hearth. Hands work close to yesterday's ashes. The room is cool except near the newly awakened fire. This is one reason cleaning often begins so early. Dirty work can be completed before principal rooms are occupied. By the time someone important enters, the grate should look respectable and the worker should ideally have disappeared. You have seen this trick before. Comfort without evidence of labour. You leave the room and encounter another branch of the cleaning empire. Laundry, a household containing the royal family, guests, attendants, and a substantial staff produces mountains of washable material. Shirts, chemises, stockings, nightclothes, children's garments, sheets, pillowcases, towels, napkins, tablecloths, kitchen cloths, and enough miscellaneous linen to make you reconsider every romantic thought you have ever had about 19th century domestic life. Laundry is physically punishing work. Before modern washing machines, textiles may be soaked, boiled, soaped, rubbed, rinsed, wrung, dried, ironed, folded, and returned. Different fabrics demand different handling, and expensive garments can require specialized care. Water is heavy. Wet cloth is heavier. Repeated exposure to hot water and harsh cleaning substances can damage hands. Then comes ironing. Flat irons must be heated and exchanged as they cool. Temperature is judged through experience rather than a convenient electronic display. Too cold and the iron accomplishes little. Too hot and you may scorch royal linen. There is probably no satisfying way to complete the sentence. Your Majesty, I've accidentally burned. So you simply do not. An odd little survival from 19th century housekeeping is the enormous range of substances recommended for removing stains. Household manuals suggest everything from soap and soda to lemon juice, spirits, chalk, bran, ox gall, and other preparations depending on the material and the offending mark. Ox gall, yes. You're welcome to appreciate your modern detergent. The Victorian cleaning cupboard can resemble the inventory of a mildly confused alchemist. And cleanliness is not merely visual. Odour matters. Rooms contain fireplaces, people, damp clothing, food, animals, candles, oil lamps, and occasionally plumbing that has decided today is the day to develop a personality. Buckingham Palace had genuine problems with sanitation during the early Victorian period. Deficiencies in drainage and ventilation attracted concern, and improvements became necessary as Victoria and Albert established their growing household there. The broader city has the same struggle on a terrifying scale. London's population is expanding rapidly while sanitation infrastructure struggles to keep pace. The famous Great Stink still lies 7 years ahead, in 1858, but the underlying sewage problems are already very real inside the palace. Chamber pots and other sanitary arrangements remain part of domestic reality. And yes, somebody must empty them. There it is. The royal fact nobody places on commemorative plates. You follow a servant along a discreet route and understand why service passages matter so much. Waste needs to move away without crossing paths unnecessarily with formal palace life. Dirty water goes somewhere. Ash goes somewhere. Kitchen refuse goes somewhere. Human waste goes somewhere. A functioning palace depends as much upon removal as delivery. For every tray carried toward the royal room, something eventually travels back. Even the most magnificent household is a circulation system. You move past a window being cleaned. Glass presents another endless battle. London soot settles outside while smoke and condensation affect interiors. Tall windows increase the difficulty simply by being tall. A worker reaches upward. You quietly decide that royal architecture has been designed by people who never expect to clean it. This principle may explain much of architectural history. Bedrooms bring still more work. Beds must be made, bed linen changed, rooms aired, wash basins refreshed, water removed, clothing collected or arranged. Children's rooms add toys, spills, and the unpredictable creativity of small people. Remember Arthur. Peacefully unaware of constitutional monarchy, he is also unaware that somebody washes his linen. The youngest royal resident may possess the least interest in palace hierarchy while generating an impressive quantity of work for it. You smile and continue. Pests form another less elegant part of 19th century housekeeping. Fleas, moths, flies, mice, and other unwelcome visitors are familiar problems across Victorian Britain. Wealth can reduce exposure through better materials, more staff, and constant cleaning. But money does not create a magical force field around a building. A mouse, regrettably, does not respect precedents. Whether Buckingham Palace in this precise year suffers significantly more or less from particular household pests than comparable elite residences is difficult to establish. Routine extermination rarely earns detailed diary entries unless something goes spectacularly wrong, and surviving household accounts provide only fragments of the everyday battle. That uncertainty is useful. It reminds you that history preserves exceptional moments more easily than repetitive labour. Nobody writes a national proclamation because a maid removes dust successfully, yet she must do it again tomorrow and the day after. Cleaning is history that erases its own evidence. The better it is performed, the harder it becomes for you to notice that it happened. You return towards one of the more formal corridors. Everything looks effortless again. The floor is clean, the furniture gleams, the fire burns. The air carries only a faint trace of polish and smoke. A visitor entering now might conclude that Buckingham Palace simply exists in this condition. You know better. Behind the shine are sore hands, early mornings, hot water, brushes, ash buckets, laundry, polishing cloths, and countless journeys through service passages. Ahead, another transformation is taking place. Footmen appear in formal dress. Doors are watched. Visitors are expected. The physical dirt has been pushed away, and now the household turns its attention to something equally demanding social order. Who enters first? Who waits? Who bows? Who receives whom? How deeply should you bow? When may you speak? Where exactly are you supposed to stand? While pretending that you have always known where you're supposed to stand, a door opens. A liveried servant takes position beside it. The palace is clean. Now it must become ceremonial. A liveried servant takes position beside the open door. The palace is clean. Now it must become ceremonial. You straighten almost automatically. Nothing has been said to you. Yet the room itself seems to demand better posture. The polished floor, tall doorway, formal clothing, and quiet arrangement of people all suggest that invisible rules have entered before you. Buckingham Palace does not merely contain etiquette, it runs on it. A visitor approaching the sovereign cannot behave as though arriving at a neighbour's house for tea. Rank determines access. Position influences precedence. Clothing communicates status. Introductions follow conventions. Movements that appear natural from a distance have often been carefully organised beforehand, and somewhere behind all this elegance is a servant making absolutely certain the correct door opens at the correct moment. You hear footsteps approaching. A gentleman enters, pauses, and is directed onward. Another waits. Waiting is one of the great hidden activities of court life. You wait to be admitted, wait to be announced, wait for someone of higher rank, wait for the Queen, wait until the conversation permits you to speak. Then, after several hours of sophisticated waiting, you may return home exhausted from having apparently done nothing. Victorian court etiquette inherits tradition from earlier royal households while adapting to Victoria's own reign. Formal presentations at court are particularly significant for members of elite society. Being presented to the Queen can mark social recognition and entry into the ceremonial world surrounding the monarchy. For young aristocratic women, presentation may form part of their emergence into fashionable society. The occasion demands preparation. Correct dress matters enormously. So does behaviour. A woman appearing at court traditionally performs a deep curtsy. Men bow according to convention and status. The movements require enough confidence to appear graceful while being performed under the gaze of people who have spent their lives noticing mistakes. You try the imaginary curtsy. Your balance immediately submits a formal resignation. Perhaps you will remain an observer. The court dress itself can be elaborate. Women appearing on formal occasions may wear trains, feathers, veils, jewellery, and gowns designed according to prescribed expectations. Men entitled to particular uniforms or court dress appear equally transformed by embroidery. Stockings, swords, coats, and decorations. The result is dazzling. It is also a considerable amount of fabric devoted to saying, "I belong here." One peculiar convention associated with 19th century court presentation involves the management of a lady's train. The long fabric trailing elegantly behind her must somehow cooperate while she approaches. Curtsies and withdraws. Fabric, unfortunately, has never studied etiquette. Attendance and practice help prevent catastrophe. Imagine spending weeks preparing to meet the Queen only to become entangled in your own clothing. The monarchy survives, your dignity may not. You continue through the sequence of rooms. Their arrangement contributes to the ceremony. Access becomes progressively more restricted as you move inward. Not every visitor reaches every space. Architecture separates public display from privileged proximity. A door is therefore never just a door. It can be a social filter. The person standing beside it may know exactly who is allowed through. This produces a strange kind of geography. Two people may occupy the same palace while living in almost different universes. A kitchen worker moves through service routes. A visiting aristocrat passes through state rooms. A senior household officer crosses boundaries inaccessible to both. Remember the servant downstairs choosing the socially correct staircase rather than simply the shortest one. Here you see why. Movement reveals rank. You hear a name announced. Names matter too. Titles matter even more. Victorian Britain contains a dense vocabulary of social distinction: dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts, barons, knights, bishops, ambassadors, ministers, household officers, military ranks, and members of royal families whose titles can become impressive enough to require a generous breath. The order in which people enter or stand can reflect precedents established through long custom. This is not merely vanity. At court, precedence helps prevent ambiguity. Everyone knows who goes first. At least, that is the theory. In practice, human beings can become remarkably interested in whether another human being has been placed 3 feet closer to royalty. Diplomatic protocol makes these questions especially sensitive. Foreign ambassadors represent sovereigns and governments, so ceremonial treatment carries political meaning. A small breach of etiquette may be interpreted as an insult far beyond the palace. Suddenly, seating arrangements become international relations. You look at an innocent chair. Dangerous object. The Queen herself occupies a peculiar position within all these rules. People around Victoria must observe formal respect for the sovereign, yet many courtiers and household members also know her personally. Some spend years in close attendance. Familiarity develops within a system designed to preserve distance. How informal Victoria becomes with particular members of her household depends heavily upon circumstance and relationship. Private correspondence sometimes reveals warmth, humour, irritation, affection, and blunt opinions far removed from the polished surface of official court life. That contrast is important. Ceremony does not eliminate personality. It conceals it temporarily. You watch a visitor cross the room, the bow is correct, the expression controlled. Perhaps the visitor is terrified, you would never know. Etiquette provides a script when emotion might otherwise become visible. The Queen receives ministers as part of her constitutional duties. By 1851, the British monarchy does not govern as an absolute institution, but Victoria retains the right to be informed, consulted, and to express views to her ministers. Political business therefore enters the palace regularly. Lord John Russell serves as Prime Minister for much of this year. Although political instability will soon complicate matters, when ministers come to the sovereign, the meeting carries constitutional significance. But it also occurs between human beings who may disagree. The precise weight Victoria's personal opinions carry in individual political decisions is not always easy to measure. Private papers show that she can hold strong views and communicate them forcefully, while ministers operate within parliamentary government and possess their own political responsibilities. Different interpretations therefore emerge depending on whether you emphasize formal constitutional limits, private persuasion, or the accumulated influence of repeated conversation. The palace room offers no easy answer. A minister leaves, another visitor enters. The machinery continues nearby. Servants remain alert without appearing interested. That requires its own discipline. Imagine standing silently while powerful people discuss matters that may appear in tomorrow's newspapers. You hear everything, you repeat nothing, at least officially. Court servants are expected to exercise discretion. The closer someone works to the royal family, the more private information may pass within earshot. Silence becomes part of the job, yet gossip, as you discover downstairs, is wonderfully resistant to regulation. Bits of information can travel through households without anyone admitting responsibility. A raised voice, a visitor departing early, an unexpected summons, a facial expression noticed by someone carrying a tray. Palaces generate rumours because so many people observe fragments without seeing the whole. You begin to appreciate how easily misunderstanding grows. A diplomat sees one conversation, a maid hears half a sentence, a courtier notices who has not been invited. By evening, 3 versions exist. By tomorrow, perhaps 7. The formal system attempts to control this uncertainty through announcements, schedules, invitations, and clearly defined roles. Bells help, uniforms help, lists help. People know where to stand, mostly. You move into another chamber as preparations are made for further visitors. A clock ticks. A servant adjusts something almost imperceptibly. Another checks the doorway. Everything is ready for the next small performance. And beneath the choreography lies ambition. Some visitors want royal favour, others want political access. Some want appointments, some want recognition, some simply want to be seen where important people gather. The palace is therefore not only a residence, it is a social marketplace conducted in whispers. Bows, invitations, and carefully timed conversations. You remember Albert's desk covered with serious papers and Victoria's attendants arranging her appearance. Those separate worlds meet here. Appearance becomes influence. Access becomes opportunity. Etiquette becomes power disguised as manners. Another carriage approaches outside, hooves slow. Wheels grind against the surface of the courtyard. A visitor is arriving. Perhaps an aristocrat, perhaps a politician, perhaps a diplomat carrying news from somewhere beyond Britain. The doors prepare to open again, and as you watch the next carefully dressed figure enter the palace, you begin to wonder what happens when all these polished people stop merely observing etiquette and start quietly wanting things from one another. And as you watch the next carefully dressed figure enter the palace, you begin to wonder what happens when all these polished people stop merely observing etiquette and start quietly wanting things from one another. The answer arrives without drama. A smile, a bow, a few measured words. Nothing appears to happen at all. That, perhaps, is the point. Influence inside Buckingham Palace rarely needs to announce itself. It travels through introductions, invitations, private conversations, letters, family connections, recommendations, and the simple privilege of being allowed into the right room at the right moment. You follow the visitor farther inside. His shoes make almost no sound against the carpet. A servant guides him toward a waiting room, where other callers sit beneath portraits and decorative ceilings while attempting to look perfectly content with waiting. Some have political business, others carry diplomatic responsibilities. A few belong to the aristocratic orbit surrounding the court. There may be military officers, bishops, household officials, foreign princes, or individuals hoping that royal attention might assist a career, appointment, charitable cause, or social ambition. Buckingham Palace attracts people who want something. Sometimes what they want is merely proximity. In Victorian high society, proximity itself has value. An invitation tells other people that you have been invited. A conversation tells them you have been noticed. A royal acquaintance can become a form of social currency. Even when nobody admits to spending it, you take a seat beside an imaginary courtier and immediately sense the problem. Everyone is observing everyone else. Who arrived, who was received quickly, who waited, who spoke privately with Prince Albert, who looked pleased afterward, and, deliciously, who did not. There is enough material here to keep London drawing rooms supplied with conversation for weeks. The court of 1851 exists within a political world that is far from tranquil. Britain has recently watched revolutions shake much of continental Europe in 1848. Monarchies have fallen or been threatened, constitutions demanded, barricades raised, and governments transformed. Britain avoids revolution, but the shock travels across borders. Victoria and Albert are intensely aware that monarchy cannot simply assume public affection. The Great Exhibition offers one expression of a more confident vision monarchy associated with industry, peace, progress, family respectability, and national achievement rather than remote extravagance. That image matters. So do visitors. Foreign dignitaries passing through royal circles encounter a British court keenly conscious of its international position. You notice a gentleman speaking French nearby. Another conversation carries a German accent. The palace is more international than its exterior might suggest. Victoria herself has extensive German family connections. While Albert was born at Schloss Rosenau in the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, their relatives and correspondents form part of a European network of royal families whose relationships can blur the boundaries between domestic affection and international politics. A cousin can also be a prince. An uncle may have diplomatic importance. A family visit can possess political overtones without anyone needing to unfold a map at dinner. This interconnected royal world produces some wonderfully complicated correspondence. Letters cross Europe discussing births, illnesses, marriages, personalities, political anxieties, and family disagreements. Private affection and public consequence sit side by side on the same page. You imagine receiving a letter from a relative. "Hope you're well." The children send their love also. "Europe appears unstable." Perfectly normal family update among courtiers. Meanwhile, competition can be subtler. Formal positions within the royal household carry prestige and access. Some appointments are political, some ceremonial, and others domestic, with traditions surrounding who holds them and under what circumstances. Earlier in Victoria's reign, household appointments even contributed to a constitutional political crisis. In 1839, when Robert Peel was expected to form a government, he wanted changes among some of the Queen's ladies because several were closely connected to his political opponents. Victoria resisted. Peel declined to form the ministry, and Lord Melbourne returned. The episode becomes known as the bedchamber crisis. There is something almost comically British about a government crisis containing the word bedchamber. Yet it reveals a serious question. Where does the Queen's private household end and politics begin? By 1851, Victoria is more experienced than the young sovereign of 1839, and her understanding of constitutional practice has developed considerably. Albert's influence has grown as well. Still, the underlying tension never disappears entirely. A royal household is personal. A monarchy is public. The same person can inhabit both worlds. You pass two ladies speaking quietly. Their conversation stops as someone approaches, then resumes. Perhaps they are discussing a dress, perhaps a visitor, perhaps nothing of consequence whatsoever. You will never know, and that uncertainty is part of court life. Much of what people call intrigue is assembled afterward from letters, diaries, memoirs, and fragments of correspondence. Those sources are rich but uneven. A diarist may record a sharp remark because it is memorable while ignoring 20 ordinary pleasant conversations. A disappointed courtier may describe another person very differently from a close friend. So when later generations reconstruct the emotional atmosphere around Victoria's court, certainty becomes slippery. Was a particular relationship genuinely hostile? Was someone merely irritated for an afternoon? Was an apparent political maneuver carefully planned? Or did later observers give ordinary social behaviour more significance than it possessed? The evidence sometimes whispers rather than answers. You move onward. A servant carries a card or message. Calling cards are an important feature of 19th century social life. Their delivery, acceptance, and use form part of an elaborate system of maintaining relationships. In elite circles, social interaction leaves a paper trail of names, visits, invitations, and acknowledgements. Even friendship can involve administration. You imagine Victorian society discovering the modern group chat. It would last approximately 6 minutes before someone demanded rules of precedence. Inside the palace, written communication arrives constantly. Petitions deserve particular attention. Ordinary people throughout Victoria's reign send requests, appeals, gifts, poems, complaints, inventions, and proposals toward the monarchy. Most cannot expect personal access, of course, and officials filter enormous amounts of material, but the impulse is revealing. People imagine the sovereign as someone who might intervene, help, approve, recognise, fix something. The Queen becomes a distant point onto which hopes are projected. Occasionally, those hopes are wonderfully eccentric. Royal households receive unsolicited objects and strange proposals from enthusiastic members of the public. Inventors may hope their device attracts patronage. Writers send books, artists seek notice, individuals propose remedies, schemes, or improvements with breathtaking confidence. Somewhere in Britain, you can safely assume, a man is convinced Prince Albert urgently needs to hear about his revolutionary new umbrella. Perhaps he does. You continue into a reception space where conversation flows more freely. This is where social skill matters. A successful courtier learns how long to speak, when to withdraw, when humour is welcome, when silence is safer. Victoria herself enjoys lively conversation with people she likes, and her private personality can be far more animated than the stern photographic image familiar from later life. She laughs, becomes enthusiastic, forms strong attachments, and develops equally strong dislikes. Albert can appear more reserved. Together they create a court increasingly associated with domestic respectability. But respectability does not eliminate rivalry, it merely gives rivalry better manners. A compliment may contain calculation, an invitation may settle a question of status, an absence may be noticed. A seat at dinner can become evidence. You remember the dangerous chair from the previous rooms. It has found accomplices, as afternoon gives way gradually toward evening. The palace changes again. Visitors depart, others remain. Formal business loosens into social entertainment. Servants begin another transformation. Rooms are prepared, lamps and candles multiply. Tables are arranged. Musicians may be expected. Dinner approaches with all the culinary machinery you have already witnessed below stairs. Clothing becomes more formal. Jewellery catches warmer light. The day's political expressions soften behind evening manners. You hear music being tested somewhere beyond the room. Just a few notes, then silence. Another instrument answers. The sound drifts along the corridor, delicate and inviting. After a day of paperwork, lessons, audiences, cleaning, waiting, and quiet manoeuvring, Buckingham Palace is preparing to entertain itself, of course. Relaxation here will require dozens of people to work extremely hard, but you already knew that. Of course. Relaxation here will require dozens of people to work extremely hard, but you already knew that. The few tentative musical notes you heard in the corridor return, this time joined by another instrument. The melody lasts only a moment before stopping again. Someone is checking tuning, placement, timing, perhaps acoustics. Even pleasure receives a rehearsal at Buckingham Palace. Outside, the light is fading. Inside, the palace begins to glow. Candles and lamps soften the rooms into pools of gold. Firelight trembles across polished furniture. Mirrors multiply every flame until the illumination seems richer than it truly is. Jewellery catches brief sparks of light as guests move. Silk rustles. Shoes whisper over carpets and click against harder floors. The smell of the palace changes too. Coal smoke remains underneath everything, but now you catch wax. Lamp oil, perfume, flowers, warm fabric, and the first distant suggestions of dinner. You've reached the social evening. For Victoria and Albert, entertainment is not simply an obligation endured with royal expressions of patience. Both genuinely enjoy music. Victoria has loved singing and opera since youth, while Albert is an accomplished musician who plays instruments, composes, and shares his wife's enthusiasm for performance. Music, therefore, belongs naturally to their domestic world. You move toward the sound. Perhaps there is a piano. Perhaps singers have been invited. Perhaps chamber music fills a drawing room rather than a vast ceremonial hall. Not every royal evening is a state occasion. Some gatherings are comparatively intimate, at least by palace standards, which means there may be only enough servants, aristocrats, musicians, and priceless furniture to make your own quiet evening at home seem tragically underfunded. Victoria enjoys dancing as well. As a young queen, she is energetic and fond of balls, and marriage does not immediately extinguish that enthusiasm. The court can host dances where carefully dressed guests move through quadrilles, waltzes, and other fashionable forms. The waltz, once considered daring because partners hold one another closely while turning, has become thoroughly established in elite society by mid-century. Scandal, like fashion, eventually becomes respectable if you wait long enough. You imagine entering the dance. There is a problem. Everyone else knows the steps. You do not. You make one experimental turn and nearly alter the line of succession. Perhaps listening to the music is safer before dancing. However, dinner may command the evening. You've already stood in the kitchen heat and watched the machinery behind royal food. Now you see the opposite end of that journey. The table is an exhibition in miniature. Fine linen lies smooth beneath carefully arranged settings. Glass catches candlelight. Silver reflects hands and faces in warped little fragments. Porcelain, serving dishes, flowers, and decorative pieces turn eating into visual theatre. The guests themselves are arranged no less carefully. Placement can reflect rank, relationship, diplomatic considerations, and the host's intentions. Conversation must travel across these boundaries without becoming awkward. A dinner table is therefore both meal and social engineering. You take an imaginary seat and immediately become conscious of your hands. Where do they go? Which glass, which fork? Why are there so many objects surrounding one plate? You decide to copy the person beside you. This strategy has rescued nervous dinner guests for centuries. Service requires astonishing coordination. Footmen move around the table with controlled precision. Dishes appear and disappear. Wine is offered. Plates are changed. Requests are answered with minimal interruption. The objective is smoothness. The labour must be visible enough to function, but discreet enough not to dominate. Remember the morning fires. The same principle returns in evening clothes. Royal comfort should look effortless. The servants know otherwise. Downstairs, cooks are still hot. In service passages, people move quickly, dirty plates accumulate out of sight. Somebody discovers that a guest has barely touched the dish that required an hour of preparation. The kitchen receives this information with the calm, spiritual acceptance for which kitchens have always been famous. You suspect otherwise. Dinner conversation can range widely. Politics may appear, although good manners and circumstance shape how openly contentious matters are discussed. Art, music, literature, travel, family news, the Great Exhibition, scientific developments, and court gossip all offer possibilities. In 1851, the exhibition is difficult to ignore. Millions of visits will be made to the Crystal Palace during its months of operation. Its scale fascinates society. Foreign goods and machinery become conversation pieces, while the building itself seems almost miraculous. Albert has every reason to feel proud. Victoria's delighted by the opening and records her enthusiasm vividly in her journal. The exhibition becomes one of the great public successes associated with the royal couple during this period. Yet even this triumph has an intimate side. Objects from the exhibition enter royal collections. Gifts circulate. Decorative arts and manufacturing are discussed not simply as commerce, but as expressions of taste and national accomplishment. Albert wants better design. He believes beauty and industry can educate one another. Your spoon suddenly feels ideologically significant. Careful with it. After dinner, guests may move into drawing rooms. Men and women are not always permanently separated according to the simplified image sometimes given of Victorian social life. Though customs surrounding post-dinner withdrawal can create temporary divisions in certain settings, the precise routine depends on the occasion. Conversation resumes in smaller clusters. Cards might appear. Victoria enjoys games, though royal recreation, like everything else, can become unexpectedly well documented when diaries and household accounts survive. One small pleasure of palace evenings is the possibility of tableaux, charades, theatrical performances, and other private entertainments. Elite Victorian households sometimes stage amateur performances, and the royal family itself develops a taste for costumes and dramatic amusements. The thought is strangely charming. You're accustomed to seeing Victoria in formal portraits, staring into history with monumental seriousness. It is easy to forget that this same household can enjoy dressing up. Costumes are arranged, parts are assigned, someone forgets a line, someone else takes the entire production far too seriously. Royal Amateur Theatre, you suspect, contains exactly the same dangers as ordinary amateur theatre, except the audience cannot leave early without creating a diplomatic incident. There is a deeper question hiding beneath these pleasant evenings. How private is royal recreation? Accounts left by Victoria. Visitors, household members, newspapers, and later memoirists provide overlapping but imperfect views. A gathering described by one participant as warm and informal may still have felt highly controlled to someone lower in rank. What counts as relaxation depends greatly on where you stand in the room. For Victoria, singing among trusted companions may feel genuinely private. For a footman standing nearby, it remains work. For a diplomat, even a casual remark may be worth remembering. So the evening contains several realities at once. You listen to the music again. Albert may join a performance or follow the score closely. Victoria responds emotionally to music, and certain singers and performers become particular favourites over the years. The room settles, conversation fades, For a few minutes, nobody needs to discuss household accounts or parliamentary difficulties. A violin line rises. The piano answers. The sound seems to soften the architecture itself. You understand why music matters here. A palace constantly turns people into roles. Queen, prince, minister, lady, footman, governess, ambassador. Music briefly allows them to become listeners, but the illusion cannot last forever. Outside the windows, darkness has completely covered London. Guards remain at their posts, doors are controlled, visitors continue moving in and out, and every gathering increases the number of people who must be watched, admitted, recognised, or refused. Buckingham Palace has reasons to take that seriously. Victoria has already survived alarming encounters with intruders and repeated attacks or attempted attacks during her reign. Public visibility may strengthen monarchy, but it also exposes the sovereign to danger. The final notes fade. Applause rises gently. A servant opens another door. Beyond the warm room, the corridor looks darker than before, and somewhere in that darkness, a guard is listening for footsteps that do not belong. And somewhere in that darkness, a guard is listening for footsteps that do not belong. You leave the warm glow of the entertainment rooms behind and enter a corridor where the palace feels suddenly larger. The music is muffled now. A door closes, and most of it disappears. Ahead, lamplight reaches only so far. Beyond that, the passage becomes a succession of shadows, doors, corners, and stretches of carpet where footsteps can approach with uncomfortable softness. During daylight, Buckingham Palace appears to control everything. At night, you begin noticing how many entrances it has, how many windows, how many staircases, how many people move through it. Security in 1851 is not a matter of cameras, electronic alarms, identification cards, motion sensors, and someone watching 20 screens while drinking coffee. It depends overwhelmingly upon people: guards, police, porters, household servants, doors, locks, rules, recognition, and attention. You approach an entrance where a guard stands watch. His presence is reassuring, though the history of Victoria's reign has already demonstrated that guards can be bypassed. One name hangs awkwardly over palace security: Edward Jones. He becomes known in newspapers as the Boy Jones. Although the label makes his behaviour sound considerably more charming than it must have felt to the royal household. In 1838, when Victoria is still young queen, Jones manages to enter Buckingham Palace. Then he does it again and again. Accounts differ in some details, but his repeated intrusions become notorious. He is discovered inside the palace on more than one occasion, apparently having wandered through rooms and gained disturbingly close access to private areas. The thought changes the corridor around you. Suddenly every dark doorway looks less decorative. Imagine discovering that a stranger has somehow entered your home. Now imagine your home is Buckingham Palace. Now imagine he has done it before. You would probably invest in a better lock. The episodes expose weaknesses in palace security and embarrass authorities. Jones is detained repeatedly, and eventually his life carries him far away from royal corridors. But his strange persistence enters Victorian popular culture. There is something almost absurd about it from a safe historical distance. A teenager repeatedly sneaks into the Queen's palace. The newspapers become fascinated. People tell stories, but remove the comic framing, and the situation is deeply unsettling. Victoria's vulnerability is not theoretical. She has also faced violence in public. In June 1840, while Victoria is riding in a carriage with Albert, Edward Oxford fires 2 pistols toward them. Neither Victoria nor Albert is injured. Oxford is arrested and tried, with questions about his sanity becoming central to the proceedings. That attack is only the beginning. John Francis attempts to attack the Queen in 1842. After suspicious behaviour one day, authorities anticipate that he may try again. Victoria and Albert deliberately go out in their carriage while officers watch for him. Think about that for a moment. You know someone may attempt to shoot at you, and you go for the carriage ride anyway. Francis appears and fires. He is captured. Victoria remains unharmed. Later that same year, John William Bean confronts her with a pistol that proves incapable of firing a proper lethal charge in the expected way. But the incident adds to the alarming pattern. By 1851, Victoria has therefore lived for years with the knowledge that appearing before the public carries genuine risk, and yet she continues to appear. Monarchy requires visibility. A sovereign hidden permanently behind walls cannot perform the same ceremonial role. So the security problem contains a contradiction. Protect the Queen, but let people see the Queen. Control access, but allow crowds near royal processions. Maintain dignity, but do not make every public appearance look like a military siege. You have discovered another palace balancing act. Albert is understandably concerned about his wife's safety, and authorities refine protective arrangements as incidents accumulate. Police surveillance and planning become increasingly important around royal movements. Still, protection remains limited by 19th century technology. A suspicious person cannot be checked against a digital database. There is no instant radio message to every officer. A description must be spoken, written, carried, remembered. Communication itself takes time. The telegraph is changing that world, but not every security problem can be solved by faster messages. At the palace entrance, recognition matters enormously. Expected visitors may be known or documented. Servants and household officials understand routines. Guards watch behaviour, but large establishments create opportunities for confusion. Deliveries arrive. Tradespeople have legitimate reasons to approach. Carriages come and go. Staff numbers are substantial. Guests bring attendants. Workmen may enter for repairs. A palace cannot function if every door is sealed, and this building is still evolving. Victoria and Albert's growing family has encouraged alterations to Buckingham Palace, including the construction of the new East Wing completed around this period. Building work creates its own security headaches labourers, materials, temporary arrangements, changing routes, and spaces not yet settled into routine. You imagine being responsible for guarding a palace while someone is modifying the palace. Is that door supposed to be there? Nobody wants that question. There is also the problem of crowds. Victoria attracts intense public interest. When she travels through London, spectators gather along routes. Royal weddings, births, public ceremonies, and major events draw attention. The Great Exhibition magnifies this culture of public spectacle. At its opening in May 1851, Victoria appears before an enormous gathering inside the Crystal Palace. The occasion is triumphant, but from a security perspective, it is also a room containing a very large number of people near the sovereign. No modern screening gates, no computerized ticket records, no discreet earpieces, just Victorian organisation, police, officials, barriers, observation, and considerable hope that everyone behaves. Most do. That is worth remembering. History records attackers precisely because they are exceptional. Millions of ordinary people see Victoria without attempting anything more threatening than cheering too loudly. The attacks nevertheless produce complicated public reactions. Some perpetrators are treated as disturbed individuals, some as attention seekers, and some become objects of morbid fascination. Motives are not always straightforward, and contemporary reporting can sensationalize details. Later writers have tried to determine whether particular attackers genuinely intended to kill Victoria, or sought notoriety through gestures designed to frighten rather than succeed. The surviving evidence does not always permit clean conclusions, especially when defendants themselves give inconsistent explanations or questions of mental illness complicate interpretation. For Victoria, however, intention can hardly make the moment comfortable. A pistol pointed toward you remains a pistol pointed toward you. You continue past another guarded point. A lock turns. The sound is simple, metal against metal, yet it carries enormous reassurance. Behind palace doors, security becomes more intimate. Servants can notice unfamiliar faces because they know who normally belongs in particular areas. Household routines create a human detection system. Someone out of place attracts attention. Usually. The boy Jones demonstrated the dangerous weakness in that word. Usually. One rather strange consequence of his intrusions is the sheer amount of folklore that grows around them. Stories claim he hides beneath furniture, steals food, sits on the throne, or even encounters private royal spaces in dramatic ways. Some claims are better supported than others. and newspaper embellishment makes separating fact from entertainment difficult. Victorian journalism enjoys a good story. A mysterious palace intruder is an extremely good story. You can almost hear editors rubbing their hands together. The deeper lesson is less amusing. Buckingham Palace is simultaneously fortress, workplace, family home, political space, and public symbol. Those functions conflict. A family wants privacy, a government needs access, a household needs deliverers, a monarchy needs ceremonies, a symbol needs to be seen. Security must somehow accommodate all five. The evening gathering begins to disperse. Carriage wheels sound outside, names are called, guests retrieve wraps and cloaks. Footmen move through entrances with renewed purpose. Guards watch the departures as carefully as arrivals. One carriage rolls away into the London night, then another. Cold air enters briefly whenever a door opens, bringing dampness and the city's smoky smell into the warmer palace. You notice Victoria's world becoming smaller again. The public evening recedes. Family rooms wait, bedrooms wait. But danger is not the only thing that can disturb a royal night. A child may develop a fever, a servant may become ill. Victoria herself may need a physician. Albert may worry over someone's symptoms. Behind all the guards, locked doors and controlled entrances, the royal household remains vulnerable to an enemy no sentry can challenge at the gate. Disease. You turn from the guarded corridor. Somewhere inside the palace, a medicine cupboard waits in the lamplight, and somewhere inside the palace, a medicine cupboard waits in the lamplight. You approach it without much enthusiasm. That is probably sensible. Medicine in 1851 occupies an uncomfortable place between centuries of inherited practice and a rapidly changing scientific world. Doctors possess considerable accumulated knowledge. They can recognize patterns of illness, set broken bones, perform examinations, prescribe diets, and offer treatments refined through experience. But they do not yet understand disease as you do. The modern germ theory of infection has not become established medical orthodoxy. Louis Pasteur's decisive experiments still lie ahead, and Joseph Lister's antiseptic surgical methods belong to the following decade. So when a palace doctor washes his hands, he may certainly value cleanliness. He just does not yet possess your understanding of microorganisms. You stare at the medicine cupboard. Suddenly it seems considerably larger. The royal family enjoys one enormous advantage over most Victorians: access to respected physicians and excellent nursing attention. If Victoria or one of the children becomes ill, medical assistance can be summoned quickly. Warm rooms, clean bedding, nutritious food, attentive servants, and the ability to rest provide protections unavailable to many poor London families. Wealth matters enormously, but wealth cannot purchase antibiotics that have not been invented. Nor can a royal command persuade a virus to observe court etiquette. Disease is magnificently unimpressed by rank. You enter an imagined sick room. The curtains may be adjusted to control light. A fire keeps the room warm. Water stands nearby. Someone listens for changes in breathing. Medicines wait on a table. The atmosphere is quiet in a different way from the ceremonial rooms. There, silence means respect. Here, it means worry. Victorian medical thinking places great importance on the patient's environment. Fresh air, temperature, diet, rest, bowel habits, sleep, and general constitution can all become part of treatment. Some of that is perfectly reasonable. Some of it leads towards remedies you would rather observe from a safe distance. A physician's medical bag might contain preparations based on substances ranging from opium to mercury compounds. Depending on the condition and practitioner, laudanum, an alcoholic preparation containing opium, is widely available in Victorian Britain and used for pain, coughing, sleeplessness, and numerous other complaints. It can also produce dependence and fatal overdose. Regulation is nothing like what you expect from a modern pharmacy. You could purchase potent substances with startling ease. The 19th century medicine cabinet is therefore best approached with the same attitude you might bring to an unexploded shell. Interesting. Historically important. Please do not lick anything. Other treatments include purgatives, emetics, poultices, tonics, bleeding in some contexts, and countless proprietary remedies advertised with heroic confidence. If the bottle claims to cure headaches, indigestion, nervousness, weakness, sleeplessness, melancholy, coughs, poor circulation, and disappointment in marriage, perhaps remain sceptical. Victorian advertising is not shy. The royal household, of course, can consult prominent medical practitioners rather than relying solely on patent remedies. One physician with an important place in Victoria's life is Sir James Clark, who serves as physician to the Queen and Prince Albert. His position brings prestige but also intense responsibility. Because royal illness becomes political news, a monarch's health is never entirely private. If Victoria becomes seriously unwell, ministers may care, courtiers care, the public cares, newspapers care very loudly. This makes medical information sensitive. How much should be announced? How should symptoms be described? When does a family illness become a matter of state? The answer shifts according to severity. You hear a child cough somewhere in your imagination, and immediately the palace feels less grand. Remember the nursery. 7 children live here in 1851. Children bring affection, noise, toys, lessons and germs. They also bring parental anxiety. Victoria and Albert have already experienced enough illness among relatives and acquaintances to understand how quickly health can change. The royal couple's correspondence repeatedly reveals concern about children's symptoms, development, diet, and physical condition. Albert, with his love of systems, takes particular interest in healthy routines. Fresh air and exercise matter, so do trips away from London. The royal family spend substantial periods at Windsor, Osborne on the Isle of Wight, and later Balmoral in Scotland. These residences offer escapes from the crowded capital and environments regarded as healthier and more restorative. London gives them good reason to leave. The city in 1851 is magnificent and filthy. Sewage contaminates water. Overcrowded districts create ideal conditions for infectious disease. Cholera has struck Britain repeatedly, including the devastating epidemic of 1848-49. Thousands die in London, and the explanation remains fiercely contested. Many medical authorities still interpret cholera through miasmatic ideas, blaming poisonous atmospheric conditions or foul smells. Yet only a few years earlier, physician John Snow has begun developing the argument that contaminated water is responsible. His famous investigation around the Broad Street pump will come in 1854. In 1851, the answer is not settled. You possess knowledge that the people around you do not. That is one of the strangest sensations historical imagination can offer. You want to tell them, the water, look at the water, but you're only passing through. Inside Buckingham Palace, drainage and ventilation have already caused practical concern. Prince Albert becomes involved in improvements to the building's domestic systems, part of his broader determination to make the royal residence function better. Smell matters, particularly in an age when foul air is widely associated with disease. If a drain produces an unpleasant odour, people do not merely dislike it, they may fear it. Oddly enough, that mistaken theory sometimes encourages useful action. Improving drainage, removing waste, and increasing ventilation can genuinely improve health, even when the reasoning behind those measures is incomplete. People can arrive at a helpful destination using the wrong map. You continue through the sick room. A thermometer, where used, does not yet possess the everyday domestic status it will acquire later in the century. Doctors rely heavily on observation pulse, skin, tongue, breathing, appetite, pain, stools, sleep, and the patient's description of symptoms. Diagnosis is an art built from signs. Laboratory medicine remains primitive by your standards. No instant blood panel, no X-ray, no scan, no nurse quietly checking oxygen saturation with a device clipped onto a finger. The doctor's senses are instruments, so are experience and judgment. This leaves plenty of room for disagreement. Two competent physicians may interpret the same symptoms differently because medicine has not yet standardized diagnosis around the technologies available to you. Even royal records sometimes leave later readers uncertain about exactly what illness afflicted a particular person. Descriptions such as fever, bilious attack, inflammation, or nervous exhaustion may represent symptom clusters rather than diagnoses recognizable today. Retrospective diagnosis is tempting, but translating 19th century language into modern disease categories can create false certainty. Better, sometimes, to admit that the patient was ill and the precise cause has slipped beyond reach. The room grows quieter. Someone adjusts the fire. Someone changes a cloth. Care is not only medical. Servants and nurses perform the repetitive work that keeps a sick person comfortable, bringing drinks, changing linen, carrying meals, emptying basins, maintaining warmth, and sitting through long hours when nothing seems to happen again. The palace depends upon patient labour. Illness simply makes that dependence harder to hide. And then there are teeth. You were relaxing, weren't you? Victorian dentistry is developing rapidly, and anaesthesia has begun transforming painful procedures. Ether and chloroform have entered medical practice during the 1840s. Victoria herself will famously receive chloroform during the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853, administered by physician John Snow. Yes, the same John Snow associated with cholera. Victorian medicine occasionally produces remarkably efficient casting. The Queen's use of chloroform will help increase social acceptance of anaesthesia in childbirth, despite religious and medical objections voiced by some contemporaries. But that lies 2 years ahead. For now, in 1851, childbirth remains one of the great medical realities hanging over Victoria's domestic life. She's already endured 7 pregnancies. 2 more await her. Royal motherhood may be surrounded by attendants and physicians, but the physical experience cannot be delegated. For all the palace's servants, there are limits to what anyone else can carry for you. You step away from the medicine cupboard. The evening has deepened while you have been thinking about illness. No crisis comes tonight. No doctor rushes through the corridors. The imagined sick room settles back into an ordinary chamber. Elsewhere, children are being prepared for sleep. Visitors have mostly gone. Fires shrink. Servants begin the long process of closing the palace for the night, and after contemplating cholera, opium, Victorian dentistry, and childbirth, a quiet corridor suddenly seems wonderfully comforting. You follow it. The lamps are being lowered. The palace is finally beginning to sleep. The lamps are being lowered. The palace is finally beginning to sleep. Not all at once, of course. A building this large does nothing all at once. Night spreads through Buckingham Palace room by room, corridor by corridor, as though darkness itself must obey household procedure. One lamp disappears, then another. A door closes, curtains are drawn, a servant passes carrying something that will not be needed again until morning. The day's grand performances are over, most visitors have departed. Outside, carriage wheels fade toward the surrounding streets. The last few departures leave brief openings through which cold London air enters the palace, bringing dampness, smoke, and the familiar scent of horses. Then the doors close, locks turn, the outside world retreats. You walk slowly now. There is no reason to hurry. The palace you entered this morning was being assembled for the day. Fires were lit, water carried, shutters opened, clothing prepared, rooms cleaned. Now the process runs gently backward. Candles are extinguished, glasses removed, chairs restored, clothing put away, ashes checked, doors secured. Everything must be made safe enough to survive the dark hours before the workers of tomorrow begin rebuilding comfort all over again. Fire requires particular attention. Hundreds of years before modern smoke detectors become an ordinary domestic object, an unattended flame can turn a small mistake into catastrophe. A palace contains abundant fuel curtains, carpets, wooden furniture, paper, clothing, bedding, decorative textiles, and candles are everywhere. You watch a servant approach one. The flame trembles, a snuffer descends. Darkness claims another small circle of the room. The smell of extinguished wick lingers briefly, sharp and smoky. Some fires remain where warmth is required, but they must be managed carefully. Grates and hearths provide protection, and household routines reduce risk. Yet the possibility of fire is never entirely absent from 19th century domestic life. You suddenly appreciate electric lighting with almost indecent enthusiasm. Press switch, receive light, no flame, no wax, no servant carrying a burning object through a corridor filled with priceless textiles. The Victorians would consider you spoiled. They would be correct. You continue toward the family quarters. The nursery has quieted. Earlier you heard lessons, movement, laughter, perhaps a small complaint about geography. Now the younger children are settling into sleep beneath the supervision of nurses and attendants. Arthur, not yet a year old, has no respect for the household schedule. Babies rarely do. He may wake during the night. He may require feeding or soothing. He may decide that 2 a.m. is an excellent time to express a strong opinion about existence. Royal babies cry exactly as ordinary babies cry. The walls do not change that. Nor does the presence of guards. You imagine a nurse lifting him carefully while most of the palace sleeps. She walks a little, rocks him, murmurs something soft. No historian records the exact words. No court circular announces. His Royal Highness was successfully persuaded to return to sleep at 2:17 in the morning, and yet moments like this make up much of human life. The official record favours ceremonies. Memory favours smaller things. You leave the nursery behind. Victoria and Albert's private evening may continue after formal entertainment ends. They can read, write, talk, attend to correspondence, or spend time together away from the larger court. Victoria is a dedicated diarist. She began keeping journals as a young girl and continues recording her experiences through her reign. Her journals become an extraordinary account of royal life. Though what survives for later readers is complicated by subsequent editing, particularly by her youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice. That creates a peculiar historical problem. You can hear Victoria's voice across time, but not always exactly as she originally placed it on the page. Beatrice later transcribes and edits much of her mother's journal material, destroying many originals after completing her copies. Consequently, intimate details may have disappeared, wording may have been altered, and passages considered unsuitable for posterity may have been softened or omitted. You stand in the imaginary quiet of 1851 and think about a page that has not yet been edited. Victoria bends over it. Ink touches paper. Perhaps she records whom she sees, perhaps what she wears, perhaps something Albert says, perhaps her reaction to music. She writes without knowing exactly which sentences will survive into your century. There is something tender about that. History often feels permanent only after it has already been damaged. The palace clock marks another portion of the night. You move on in service areas. The day is not finished. This is easy to forget. The Queen can retire before everyone who serves her. Dinner has created dishes. Entertainment has disturbed rooms. Guests have used glasses, napkins, chairs, lamps, doors, and passages. Some tasks can wait until morning, others cannot. You encounter a footman finishing duties. His posture is still controlled, but fatigue shows in the slower movement of his shoulders. Remember the servants who woke before the royal household. Some members of staff may have been active for an astonishingly long day. Though duties and shifts vary according to position, late entertaining stretches working hours, and servants responsible for nighttime attendance cannot simply disappear because they feel sleepy. The palace rests unevenly. One person sleeps while another remains available. A senior servant may have different accommodations and hours from a junior worker. Some employees live within palace premises or associated household spaces. Others have arrangements shaped by their specific roles. Exactly where every category of worker slept at every point in Buckingham Palace's changing 19th century layout cannot be reconstructed neatly. Rooms were reassigned. Building alterations change circulation, and administrative documents often care more about official functions than the private comfort of the people performing them. So you resist the temptation to imagine one enormous servant's dormitory. Reality is messier and more interesting. A young worker may share sleeping space. A higher-ranking employee may enjoy greater privacy. Either way, the mattress eventually becomes the most beautiful object in Buckingham Palace. No gilding required, you descend toward quieter service corridors. The kitchen that overwhelmed you with heat earlier has changed character. The great rush has ended. Surfaces have been scrubbed. Equipment waits. Residual warmth remains in masonry and metal. The smells are softer now, cooling fat. Soap, damp stone, ashes, bread, and the ghost of everything cooked during the day. Perhaps a tiny amount of food remains available for staff. Victorian household customs concerning leftovers can be surprisingly complex in some establishments. Unused food forms part of servants' customary privileges or is redistributed according to internal practice. Elsewhere, strict accounting attempts to prevent waste or unauthorized taking. The line between leftover and perquisite can become remarkably important when wages are modest. Imagine an argument over cold roast beef conducted with the seriousness of constitutional law. In a palace, even scraps can acquire bureaucracy. You continue upward again. Your feet remember the stairs. How many times have you climbed them? Today now. Imagine doing it for years. The physical geography of service becomes embedded in the body. A maid knows which stair creaks. A footman knows how long it takes to cross from one area to another. A nurse recognizes the sounds of children sleeping. A guard recognizes ordinary footsteps. Night turns routine into knowledge. You pass a window. Outside lies London. The city is not sleeping completely either. Taverns still hold customers. Night workers continue their trades. Policemen walk beats. Horses pull late vehicles. Somewhere a train may be arriving, steam curling through a station beneath gaslight. The Metropolitan Police has existed for just over 2 decades. Founded in 1829, and the capital's nights are increasingly associated with uniformed policing. Yet darkness remains darker than you know. Street lighting exists, especially through gas, but illumination is uneven. Beyond bright areas, shadows dominate and from the palace, scattered lights stretch into the smoky city. You return toward the grander rooms. Without people, they feel different, smaller, somehow. Furniture becomes shapes. Portraits recede. The enormous machinery of rank has stopped moving through them. No diplomat is measuring his bow. No courtier is watching who speaks to whom. No guest is worrying about a train. For a few hours, a chair is simply a chair. A little farther on, guards remain awake. Security does not sleep. Neither do all servants. Someone must be available if Victoria requires assistance. If a child becomes ill, if a fire is discovered, or if some unexpected disturbance breaks the routine. The palace is therefore never truly silent. Listen, a fire settles with a soft crack. A board responds to changing temperature. Fabric shifts near a window, far away. A door closes, then footsteps, slow, regular, fading. You remember the morning when this building seemed to be made from activity. Now you understand that its hidden life is also made from pauses, from waiting, from people sitting awake while others sleep, from fires kept alive, from doors watched, from a nurse listening for a baby's cry. You stop in the dim corridor. Tomorrow, coal will arrive at the grates again. Water will climb the stairs. Brushes will attack the dust. Albert's papers will multiply. The children will return to their lessons. Victoria will dress. Visitors will bow. Dinner will travel upward, and nobody looking at the polished palace will see most of what makes it possible. Tonight, however, the machinery has slowed enough for you to hear the building breathe. You move deeper into the darkness, toward one final quiet understanding of the people. Privileges, routines, and invisible hands concealed behind Buckingham Palace's walls. You move deeper into the darkness, toward one final quiet understanding of the people. Privileges, routines, and invisible hands concealed behind Buckingham Palace's walls. At this hour, distinctions begin to blur, not disappear, never quite that. The Queen still sleeps as Queen. A servant still sleeps as a servant. Guards remain on duty because the sovereign's safety cannot be suspended until breakfast, somewhere in the building. A nurse may still be listening for Arthur to stir. But darkness removes some of the day's visual certainty. You no longer see uniforms clearly. Gold decoration loses its brilliance. Portraits become vague rectangles against walls. The polished corridors that spent daylight announcing status now simply lead from one quiet place to another. You think back to the gates where you began. Buckingham Palace looked solid from there. permanent, almost self-sufficient. After one day inside, you know better. A palace is not merely stone. It is repetition. Before Victoria wakes, someone carries coal. Before she dresses, someone brings water. Before the family eats, someone prepares food. Before a visitor enters a spotless room, someone removes the dust. After the visitor leaves, someone restores the room again. The monarchy appears stable, partly because thousands of unstable little things are constantly corrected. A candle burns down. Replace it. A shirt becomes dirty. Wash it. A child becomes hungry. Feed her. A grate fills with ash. Empty it. A minister arrives. Admit him. A stranger approaches the wrong door. Stop him. A queen needs to appear effortless. Work harder. That is the hidden rhythm you have been following. In 1851, Victoria has been on the throne for 14 years. She will reign for another half-century, until 1901, eventually giving her name to an age so broad and complicated that Victorian becomes shorthand for everything from industrial confidence to strict morality, imperial power, domestic sentiment, scientific change, social inequality, and furniture apparently designed to defeat anyone attempting to move house. But Victoria cannot see that future tonight. Neither can Albert. For them, 1851 is simply now. The Great Exhibition has brought extraordinary excitement and success. Their family is growing. Albert's public standing has improved. The monarchy appears increasingly associated with a respectable domestic ideal. There are family photographs to come, marriages, grandchildren, new palaces and old arguments. There will also be losses they cannot imagine from this peaceful corridor. Albert has only 10 years left to live. His death in December 1861 will devastate Victoria and transform both her private life and public image. The colourful young queen you watched dressing this morning will eventually become the famous widow in black. But you do not tell her. Tonight she still has Albert. That knowledge makes the sleeping palace feel unexpectedly fragile. History gives you an unfair advantage over the people living inside it. You know endings. They know mornings. Perhaps that is why ordinary details begin to matter more. The brush on Victoria's dressing table, the children's lesson books, Albert's papers, a cooling kitchen range, a servant's tired shoes. These things possess no idea that they're historical. They simply exist. A small sound reaches you from somewhere below, perhaps a clock mechanism, perhaps a settling door, perhaps nothing you can identify. You keep walking. One feature of Victoria and Albert's household deserves to remain in your mind because it reaches far beyond these walls. The deliberate cultivation of family life becomes central to the public image of the 19th century British monarchy. Portraits and later photographs present parents and children together. The sovereign is not shown only as a remote political figure. She's also wife and mother. Albert is husband and father. Their children become part of the monarchy's public story. This domestic image helps distinguish Victoria's court from the reputational excesses associated with some earlier royal generations. Yet the image is selective. Every family portrait has edges. Outside those edges stand nurses, governesses, dressers, cooks, cleaners, footmen, coachmen, gardeners, clerks, guards, and other workers who make royal domesticity possible. The family can appear comfortably gathered because someone else has lit the fire. That does not make that affection false. It makes the picture incomplete. You've spent the night looking beyond the frame, and what you find there is not one simple story of privilege or hardship. Royal service can provide employment, prestige, accommodation, connections, and long careers. It can also demand obedience, discretion, physical endurance, and extraordinary hours. Which side weighs more heavily cannot be settled with one answer, because the palace contains too many different lives. A senior official with influence and comfortable quarters does not experience Buckingham Palace as a young maid carrying dirty water does. Even two workers of similar rank may remember the same household differently. One may feel pride, another confinement. Most probably feel several things at once. Human beings are inconvenient that way. History would be much easier if everyone agreed on their own experience. Fortunately, they do not. You pass the entrance to a service staircase. Earlier it seemed merely practical. Now it feels symbolic. The grand staircase tells visitors what monarchy wants them to see. The service staircase tells you what monarchy requires. Both are Buckingham Palace. Neither is the complete building without the other. There is another easily missed irony here. The palace itself is not especially ancient by royal standards. Buckingham House began as an early 18th century aristocratic residence and was acquired by George III in 1761. It was later enlarged substantially, particularly under George IV. Before Victoria became the first sovereign to make Buckingham Palace her principal London residence in 1837. So the building that feels timeless to you is still relatively new as the monarch's principal palace in 1851, and it is still being adjusted. The East Wing has recently reshaped the complex to accommodate the royal family's needs. The famous facade known to later generations will change again. History is not finished decorating. You pause near a dark window. Your reflection appears faintly in the glass. Beyond it, London stretches into night. More than 2 million people inhabit the metropolis around you. Most will never enter these rooms. Many live in conditions radically different from the comfort you have witnessed here. Some occupy overcrowded housing, some work exhausting hours, some struggle with food, sanitation, and insecure employment. The contrast cannot be ignored. Buckingham Palace represents the summit of a deeply unequal society. Yet even here, inequality repeats internally. A queen, a prince, an aristocratic lady, a senior servant, a junior servant, a labourer, different doors, different meals, different bedrooms, different expectations, and still, everyone becomes tired. Everyone becomes hungry. Everyone becomes ill eventually. Everyone waits for morning. That common humanity is quieter than hierarchy. But at night you can almost hear it. The palace has finally become still enough. You return in memory to everything you touched without touching. The coal dust, warm water, silk, paper, copper pans, polished silver, soap, cold stone, carpet beneath tired feet. You remember smells too. Smoke in the morning, bread from the kitchens, wax after sunset, perfume in formal rooms, cooling ashes at night, and sounds, bells, knives, carriages, children, music, locks, footsteps. So many footsteps. That may be the truest sound of Buckingham Palace in 1851. Not trumpets, not applause, footsteps, people moving because something needs doing. The public sees monarchy standing still. Behind it, everyone walks. And now even those footsteps are fading. You allow yourself to stop walking. There is nothing more you need to inspect tonight. No bell is calling you, no tray waits in your hands, no fire needs your attention, no visitor needs announcing, and no impossible Victorian skirt expects you to cross a room without stepping on it. The palace can continue without you. Let the final corridor stretch gently into shadow. The last fire settles lower in its grate, glowing softly beneath a layer of ash. Beyond the windows, London becomes distant. Its wheels and horses reduced to a faint murmur that no longer asks for your attention. Upstairs, the children sleep. Albert's papers wait untouched until morning. Victoria's jewellery rests in darkness. Down below, copper pans have cooled. The brushes are still. The staircases are empty. For a little while, nobody climbs them. You can leave the servants their sleep. Leave the guards their quiet watch. Leave the Queen inside a year whose future she cannot yet know. 1851 begins to drift away from you now. The smoke thins, the candlelight grows smaller. Even the palace walls seem softer when you no longer need to see every detail. You have followed an entire hidden day, from the first scrape of ash before sunrise to the last lock turning after midnight. And now there is only stillness. Let the names fade first, then the rooms, then the corridors. You do not need to remember anything. History will remain here when you wake. For now, allow Buckingham Palace to become only a distant shape beneath a dark London sky. Every window quiet, every footstep gone. The final ember dims, the great house rests, and you can rest too, sweet dreams.